Good evening, members. Apologies for the slight delay there, just a little bit of clarification about apologies there. We have apologies from Councillor Peake, and we have Councillor Campbell substituting, and we have apologies from Councillor Fern, and we have Councillor Galvin stepping in his place. Moving on to item 2, record of the meeting. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 14th of December 2023 as correct? Thank you. There are no urgent matters. Moving on to item 4 then. Are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests? Excellent. So without further ado, we move on to item 5, which is a members' item from Councillor Galvin, who will also be joined by some residents who will also make a presentation.
Good evening, colleagues, and thank you, Chair, for allowing this item to come forward. Just a slight correction on item 5, paragraph 3.1. I'm afraid I had a bit of a grey moment when I wrote the little bit on the issue. It should have been 24 and 26 Aintree Road, not 28. So please forgive me for that. The issue is at the rear of Aintree Road at Lordswood, there's a band of trees that separate the rear of the properties from North Dane Way. The trees there form a very useful function in they provide a tree cover, and for most of North Dane Way you can't actually see the houses, and from the other side the big advantage is they act as a sound barrier as well, because North Dane Way, as many of you know, is a very busy road. So having a dense planting of trees is quite a good thing to have. Unfortunately, at the rear of numbers 24 and 26, there is a sycamore tree, just one tree with several stems, stems coming out of the ground. Unfortunately, over the last 2 or 3 years, during the summer months, that tree has been infested by aphids. And unfortunately, the aphids have a habit of excreting what I can only describe when I saw it as like a honey-type substance. It's like the whole of the back gardens and right up to the rear of the properties has been sprayed in honey. That's the only way I can describe it. The rest of the unfortunate consequences I will leave to the residents to explain to you, but I think there is an easy solution to this, Chair. As I said, the tree cover is quite thick, and I think if the sycamore tree were to be removed, there would be the opportunity for the other trees adjacent to it to step into the space. If one of our arboricultural officers considered that that wouldn't work, that there would be too much of a gap left, I will give a pledge this evening that I am prepared to fund replacement tree or trees to fill in the gap, because I do believe that the tree cover is important. Trees are vital to our environment. They clean the air most of the time. They're a really good feature. But every once in a while, something like this happens. I mean, the other incident, of course, when a tree grows too big and the branches hit a property. So there are reasons, or the tree fails in other ways of getting rid of it. The general principle that's in our tree policy, that we should be pro-tree, is something that I wholeheartedly endorse, and that's the right and proper course for us to do. But this is one of those rare occasions where the trees are actually, these particular sycamore trees are causing far more nuisance than I think their ecological worth. So on that note, Chair, if I may finish, and I'll hand over to Trevor Tremont here, who lives at number 24.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Trevor Hickmott from 26 Aintree Road, Chatham, and I'm speaking tonight also for my neighbour, Mrs Rachel Lutschwager, from 24 Aintree Road. We are both complaining about the large sycamore tree at the bottom of our gardens. I have lived at 26 Aintree Road since the road was developed over 40 years ago. When I moved in, there were no trees in the piece of land outside our bottom boundary. The land there was highways land. After several years, the council, without any notification or consultation, planted trees up to the boundary fence. One of these was a sycamore. My wife and I are retired, and every year we spend a lot of time and effort tending and planting our garden, making a lovely area. To us, it is important for our mental health and welfare to have this area where we can sit and relax and recover from the pressures and stresses of modern life. Also for my wife's long-term health issues. Rachel's garden has a large lawn area and children's playthings, as she is a single parent with 2 young children and a dog. Her garden is extremely important to her to allow the children to get some safe exercise and fresh air, and for her to relax in and to help with her mental health. Last year, around the end of April, the sycamore developed huge numbers of what appear to be long stalks covered in seeds, and shortly after they started falling in our gardens. Within a couple of weeks, our gardens were covered in these seeds. They were falling and being blown around all day and night. Our patios, lawns, gardens, building furniture and toys were quickly covered in a sticky secretion. It could not be swept or hosed as it was just too sticky. We could not mow the lawns as it continuously clogged the lawn mowers up. Rachel's daughter's trampoline was completely covered and could not be cleaned or used. Her dog could not go out into the garden, neither could she or the children. We could not use our gardens either, as we couldn't walk around as the soles of our shoes were covered in this sticky foliage mess. This went on for some 3 months until the stickiness started to dry and there was no more falling of foliage. But even then it left brown stains on furniture, etc. Having raised it with Councillor Galvin, there were exchanges with council employees. We asked for the tree to be removed, supported by Councillor Galvin, but were told this was against council policy for sycamores. They were apparently important, providing habitat and food for insects, etc. This seemed to be the overriding reason we couldn't be helped. Mr Abnett apparently visited the site on the footpath outside of our boundary around the 13th of June and reported the tree was very healthy and not in a condition to be removed. He stated the main stem was undamaged. I don't think he's talking about the same tree, as it has 6 main stems. I don't know how he made the decision, as the 6 stems are completely covered for 15 feet in ivy. And I checked the land around the tree after this comment, and there was no evidence of anyone checking the tree, as the undergrowth was some 4 foot high and not trodden down. He was asked to attend to see our gardens. He did not have the common courtesy to do this and has never seen the issue. It is totally unacceptable for an issue caused by the council to stop us using our gardens and causing us to be confined to our houses for some 3 months at the nicest part of the year. Even washing could not be dried outside for this period as they were smothered in this sticky foliage. My wife put some towels out and they had to be washed and washed again. Tumble dryers had to be used for this period, increasing expense to us again. This applied to both of our families. This has grossly affected all our mental health and well-being and causing concern, anger and depression. It is suggested that removing the tree will cause an issue to wildlife and insect life. If removed, another species of tree could replace it. There is a suggestion also that a third could be pruned out and all overhanging branches removed, and this should address the issue. It won't, because the sticky foliage completely covered our gardens up to the back of our houses, some 40 feet away. Also, my veranda roof, my rear windows, they were all covered in it as well. We are not sure the brown residue can be cleaned off. It hasn't been able to be so far. We may have to get some specialist cleaners in. The cost will need to be picked up by somebody, I'm assuming not us. Hopefully it would be for the council, because it is your property that's caused the problem. We would be charged if we damage council property. Plus, pruning just encourages growth. Everyone knows that. The overhanging branches were pruned off about 3 years ago. It has made no difference, and the branches have all grown back even more than before. It is totally unacceptable what is happening and will start again in about 3 months. It is apparent council officials put the health and welfare of insects over the health and mental well-being of residents. Please, can you help us? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Hickmott. Any member? Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. What I would like to see is see some photographs of this, because if this is multi-stem cedar, they're not. It's not like an oak or something. I mean, everyone's right. We should save as many trees as we can, but sycamore. I'm sorry, is it sycamore? I mean, everyone reckons that sycamore is more like a weed. It self-seeds and it grows. So I don't think, from the importance of a tree, you would never put a TPO, I don't think, on a sycamore. But I'd like to see some sort of photographs of this tree and see how bad the situation is. Sorry, I've got some here now.
Members are advised there are some photographs. There aren't enough copies for everyone, but they are being passed down the line at the moment, so you will have the opportunity to take a closer look.
I will pass them round, but looking at this, everything is covered, and I can understand the roofs are all covered with everything. But if they're prepared to put in some native trees to replace the one coming out, I wouldn't see that that's a problem, and we should support that.
Councillor Nestorov.
Thank you, Chair. The falling of the tree may help a resident with the stickiness of his garden, but to retain the tree would be more beneficial in terms of climate change and retaining the character of the area. Large trees, such as the one under discussion, possess extensive root system that could spread several meters from the trunk. We discussed that several planning committees ago. The removal of such tree could potentially lead to damage to nearby properties and may render the land vulnerable to subsidence. Additionally, it should be noted that the tree is near a public highway, North Dean Way, and the removal could potentially cause damage to the highway, leading to additional expenses to the council. My question is for Councillor Govin. You mentioned that you're willing to replace the tree. Does that mean you're going to replace with the same size tree, or you're going to plant new small trees? Thank you.
First of all, about the issue of any damage from root systems, there's at least 40 feet between the tree and the rear of the properties. Most roots for trees, my understanding is, will extend as far as the spread of the tree. That's my understanding. So there is no chance of any damage to properties or indeed to the highway. I would be perfectly willing, I make a pledge here this evening, to fund a replacement native species tree, beech or silver birch, which are very common native species in Walderslade and Lordswood. I think it's very important to preserve our native species and as a replacement for this tree. Although I personally believe, I'm no expert arborologist, but I believe, looking at the site, if the tree were to be removed, I think the other trees that are surrounding it would fill the gap. But I would defer to a tree expert on that. If the tree expert says that wouldn't work, then I will pledge to fund a replacement tree or trees.
We will assist with funding.
Yeah. And the residents would be happy to assist with that funding as well.
Councillor Cook.
That one's better. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you for coming and sharing that. And I think we can really understand the frustration and the impact that that's had. And, you know, I don't think anyone here is belittling that, you know, that not being able to dry the washing, not being able to get the children and grandchildren outside, the dog, you know, really do understand that. So I think my questions are absolutely not about not more than inconvenience, but the impact. I think for me it's two things. One is a question around precedent and policy. And I, being a fairly new councillor, have been new to understanding the reality of how we can support our residents, and have had lots of difficult issues with trees myself, and lots of ongoing things that have caused my residents a lot of problem. And I think there's something for me in this committee around deferring back to officers to look at and continue to address, rather than, personally, I feel quite uncomfortable in starting to make those decisions about what should and shouldn't be done in this kind of situation. And that might be something, to come back on precedent. I think the conversation for me is, has everything been done that could be? And I'm conscious that in here there are a couple of things that haven't been mentioned. One is, this is about aphids, and I don't see anything in here about what it used to be like. These aphids have then come, and has there been any treatment to solve that problem? And so that's why I'm feeling that in terms of precedent and policy, I'm not the person to know the whole history of this situation. And it seems then from the director's response, this sensitive approach might be this kind of thing that we might need more advice on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Doe.
Yeah, I think if we go back to very quickly to the reasoning behind the present policy, and I'll go on to talk about this one, but basically when we formed that particular policy, it was because there was an awful lot of people, particularly on some of the sort of greenfield estates, that were wanting trees felled so they get better satellite reception, and so on and so on and so on. And what the whole policy was to make it much more difficult for people, just because they don't particularly like a tree, to have it removed. And therefore we had to give some clear guidance, and what they have at the moment is a clear guidance. However, when you're dealing with things that affect people, I think you have to look at the pain threshold, if you like, of these things. Quite clearly, to plant sycamore trees was a damn daft idea in the first place. And I think that what we should do is certainly to replace them. I don't think it vitiates the whole policy. I think it just really is almost an exceptional item which just needs to be dealt with in the way that we've suggested. Because I think if you don't, you can't really ask residents to put up with this sort of lifestyle where everything is being covered in these sticky substances. And I have seen these on a number of occasions, and they really do make life very difficult. So I myself would recommend that they actually, we do agree to the removal of this, but on the basis this is being done in the light of the particular circumstances of this case. And it's not necessarily a precedent. You'll also recognise that we are in a process of reviewing our tree policy anyway, so that can be something that can feed into that if you wish. I don't see why it shouldn't. That'd be my suggestion anyway, that we deal with this on a one-off basis and remove this, particularly as we've had an offer of replacement. And then I think that after that we can look at it in the context of the overall tree policy. But I would caution anybody that when you're looking at that, then do be aware that you do get a lot of people, and not these complainants, I hesitate that doesn't apply to you, but a lot of people for almost ridiculous reasons, they just want the trees removed. Some of that was due to the fact that they shouldn't have been planted where they were planted in the first place, but even so, if you took all the requests, you'd have completely changed the character of areas. So you've got to be quite careful about that. But on this one-off, I would certainly support the applicants.
Any other member? So I think it's quite important that we clarify that cutting down the tree is not a decision for this committee. That's not a decision that we can take tonight. That's not, constitutionally, that's not an option for us. And certainly the offer has been made to refer back to officers and undertake that full site inspection, further site inspection. So I think we need to be realistic about what we can do here tonight. And I think that your points have been very well made, and I don't think anyone is underestimating the impact. I think the difficulty is that simply saying that a tree will be replaced with a sapling or whatever, the tree policy is set out, and I'm not clear, and perhaps officers can advise, but I'd be doubtful if that was a straightforward like-for-like replacement that could simply override the tree strategy. Now, Councillor Doe mentions that the tree strategy is currently being reviewed, and that, you know, who's to say whether these things are not going to influence the way those discussions go forward. But I don't really think it's the place of this committee to demand things which are simply not, you know, in line with that strategy. I mean, perhaps Ian can give us a steer on that.
Thank you. The policy is very clear. The only reason to do this is for those professional and technical reasons, and it expressly excludes felling a tree for nuisance. So I'm extremely sympathetic to the situation you find yourself in, but the current policy makes it very clear in this situation that it isn't a good reason to fell the tree. And as you said, a tree is much more complex than a replacement for a sapling or a small tree. The ecosystem that surrounds that is a lot more technical. So under the current policy, the advice that exists in the response is the correct one. I suggested to the residents and Councillor Galvin, I'm happy to have a site inspection. I'll even accompany the tree officer, and we'll explore anything that's feasible. And I can even report back to this committee, and we'll explore that. But the current tree policy is very clear, and it's unambiguous, because that canopy coverage, all of those factors are so important to us, probably even more so than when that policy was written.
I think that's really helpful, and you know, I will not be alone on this committee in having issues in their own wards with decisions like this, and they go either way, and it does feel rather abrupt. You know, there's a very venerable tree in my ward which has been condemned on the basis of an expert report. You could probably find a second opinion which disagreed with that, but once you have that expert opinion that complies with the policy, it's very difficult to deviate from that. So it is complicated, and it cuts both ways, if you'll pardon the expression. I think that would be helpful if we did have that site inspection. I think that's certainly the next step, because the residents are clearly not satisfied that the inspection that did take place was satisfactory. So we certainly need to address that. And if you were able to participate in that, Ian, I think that would be really helpful. And we need to take it from there. So I think that, you know, the only reasonable outcome that this committee can conclude is that we refer this back to officers for that full site inspection, and to explore all of those options, and to see just how much we can do and remain inside that tree policy, but also with a mind to looking at the revised policy coming forward, and whether that perhaps offers some other options. I mean, if any member wishes to contribute further, happy to take that. Otherwise, we'll go to the Vice Chair for. Okay. Councillor Etheridge.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's just basically on what you said. If that's a recommendation, could we actually have that seconded and we're voting on it, please?
I'm sorry, Councillor Etheridge. I was thinking out loud, and I think that's the way we do this. We come to the proposal to explore whether that's a feasible route that we can go down. So and
I agree with you, Chairman. I'm just saying let's make it a formal recommendation.
Well, when we've heard from Councillor Hine, then we'll certainly proceed down that route.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened very carefully to what the residents have said, and also to the officers as well. And while I do appreciate the current policy, when matters like this are brought to my attention as a councillor, I always like to think about how I would feel if this was me, if this was my garden and I had this every summer dealing with this. And I think we would all have a very different view if we had this occurring every single year. And I would like to associate myself with the comments made by Councillor Doe that this should be a one-off, really, and I appreciate it's not in the powers of this committee to do that, but I do think we should look at alternative options, because these residents are going through hell every summer, and it's right that we do something to help them.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Hine. I think everyone would agree with that. Vice Chair, Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of comments. It's about the language that's being used. I really, we agreed that we would use the term chairperson, not chairman. I do think it's important that we use inclusive language in our discussions here in committee and at full council. In terms of the actual issue, I would like to make the proposal that we refer it back to the officers, particularly the tree officer who's an expert in this area, that there's a more full assessment made and recommendations on how to proceed with it.
Hopefully, Vice Chair, that helps you some way to making a proposal. I can see you furiously scribbling.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to make this? The committee is asked to note the comments from the Director of Place in response to the member's item, and the committee would like that to also include an offer of a site visit and report back from various expert officers, including possible recommendations of the way forward.
Is that seconded? Agreed? Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, Mr Hickmott. Grateful for you coming out on a January evening and setting out your case. We absolutely hear what you've had to say, and we hope that the full site visit and inspection offers some other options that hopefully deal with this issue for you. Thank you. Give Councillor Galvin time to resume his position. And we move on to agenda item 6, which is pages 17 to 34 of your report pack. It's the attendance of our portfolio holder, Councillor Curry. And once again, I'll keep talking to allow him to take his seat. We don't have any stage hands to speed his arrival. And Councillor Curry, who is the portfolio holder for climate change and strategic regeneration, will introduce this item in his own time. So when you've gathered your breath, Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Committee, for taking the time to speak with me this evening. I just wanted to, I presume I just introduce it by saying that the report's been presented to you. I'd just like to give my thanks to all the officers. Obviously, you can see from the portfolio and the policy areas that I'm responsible for within my remit. There's a lot of issues to cover, and that's a lot of hard work by officers to pull this together. So I really appreciate the time and energy and effort and expertise that has gone in to putting this together. Thank you, Chair.
Any member? Councillor Campbell.
Thank you for the report, Councillor Curry. It was fascinating reading. It's a good picture of everything that's happening Medway-wide, and it reflects a lot of conversations we've been having with local residents. I have a couple of points I'm hoping you can help me with. One is around EV charging points. Now, I have an electric vehicle, and I'm in the privileged position that I have a charging point installed at home and a drive, so I can charge it overnight at home. But I am in touch with lots of local residents who have EVs, and they don't have the same facility. So I can see that you have plans and you've mentioned EV charging points. Do you have specific numerical targets for how many charging points there should be and when they'll be active and online? Because I do travel around Medway and see that there are places which have the charging points installed, but they're either not in working order or they've just never been made live. I think it's pretty critical for people who are visiting Medway to have those charging points. The other issue is the number of fast charging points. So you obviously have the charging points that you leave your car parked and charge for like it's 10 hours, 6 hours, whatever. But then there are those charging points that people when they're traveling will need to charge their car up quickly in 30 to 40 minutes. And when I look at ZapMap, which is the app I use for finding those points, there just aren't that many, and the ones that are there are not always working. So it's a real deterrent for people, I think, to transition to EVs. If I could just, Chair, if I could just make 3 questions together, and then you could answer. Is that okay? So that was about EVs. The second question I had was about where you mentioned that there's still a significant quantity of food waste and recycling which continues to be disposed of in black sacks destined for incineration. So I'm just curious, are there any innovative models people have tried in other local authorities of trying to change that behavior? Are there any improved communication strategies we can think of in terms of how we communicate that with residents? I particularly notice whenever I've had new neighbors, there's a painful process where they just don't recycle properly, or they don't know how it happens. And I know I've got residents complaining, sometimes you've got transient populations in certain areas, and there the recycling rates seem to be lower. You can see kind of rubbish lying around, things that should be recycled. So I'm just curious if there are, if you have explored and looked at learning from elsewhere as to how we can maybe improve that. And the final thing is about bus routes. Again, I can see that there's been funding in place. There's funding in place to improve bus routes. And I wondered if you have a map of specific areas where you think routes should be introduced, the frequency should be. So when I moved here from London, from a London borough, I didn't have a car, and I fully expected to rely on public transport. And then pretty soon I had to buy a car, which is a real shame because of the amount of time it was taking to get around and to do the things I needed to do. And for the cost that it is at, it's just not good value for money. So, and people are not going to adopt public transport unless we fix that issue. So I'm just curious to see what that looks like, what that roadmap looks like in terms of where the routes will be introduced and when. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you for that. At the outset, I do apologise. I'm just recovering from a sinus problem, so my hearing's not perfect on my right-hand side. So if I've missed anything, I do apologise, and do come back to me and answer. Your first point was about fast charging and EV charging generally. Obviously, we've got a strategy for that. It's a developing strategy. It's one that's fairly new. It's very limited in Medway from what we've got at the moment, and it covers a wide-ranging area. And you're absolutely right. It's early days for EV charging in Medway generally. So I think the way we're looking at it is that where we can do it and quickly and easily, we're doing it. So if you've got people with driveways, often they'll do it for themselves in their own homes, if you can park in a driveway and such like that. We're working, talking to the local garages and stuff like that, the various things, and a number of the sort of major sort of oil companies are actually installing EV charging within their garage facilities. We've got EV charging going into car parks, and that's taking its time because it's expensive and takes time to do, so it's all dependent on funding. The real bugbear really is the Victorian streets that we have throughout the centre of town, and how we address that and how we deal with charging for people who live in those streets, which is equally important, is quite a conundrum. So what we'll probably have within the strategy that's emerging at the moment is a sort of series of steps where we can introduce the slightly easier areas and gradually work to the more complex areas like the sort of Victorian terrace streets in the centre of Chatham and Gillingham and such like. So it's going to take time. I can't tell you how long it's going to take. We can't put a time scale on how many. A lot of it. So the two issues really, it's about funding and it's about the complexity of how we install the charging issue. And just one third point around the charging is about the power supplies themselves. If you're powering it from your own home, that's relatively straightforward. If you're providing it in a car park, you've got to dig up the power supplies in the car park and such like, so it makes it more complex as well. So that's kind of where we are at the moment on EV charging. I hope that covers your point quite well. On the recycling issue, you're talking about recycling of two issues. Can you just run back over that, please?
So recycling, it's about, I know you've mentioned it in the report that it's about behavior change of people to recycle more, and that we're still not where we need to be in Medway in terms of optimizing recycling. And there's a lot of food waste and recycling that continues to be disposed of in black sacks. So I just had a quick look at the LGA website, and they have an innovation kind of hub there. So looking at some other local authorities, what they've done is they've invested in a very specific and targeted sort of communication strategy of finding really engaging and relevant and accessible ways of getting the message across to residents. And in my own experience, I noticed that when new people move into the area, or you have areas with transient populations, that's where you kind of tend to see more problems with, you know, curbside, even just putting the bins out properly, and how the level of recycling that people take up. So I'm just curious, have we kind of explored all of those avenues as to how we can improve the take-up of recycling facilities?
I think, yeah, again, covering an area that's complex, if you like, and it's about behavioural change in the community. Up to now, I think our recycling rates are pretty awful, actually, in Medway, about 37%, something like that. So it's very low. Ideally, we should be twice that if we can. I mean, if you look at some of the best local authorities in the country, they're way up above 50%. So we certainly like to be much, much higher than we are. And in order to address that, you know, I think there's no sort of secret now. One of the main things we need is a proper waste recycling strategy. And in order to achieve that, that covers a wide range of issues, everything from the vehicles we use, from the depot, from the kind of collection procedures that we have. All that comes together under one strategy. And the heart of that, I think there's two things that are dear to my heart, as you know, is about the recycling rates and decarbonising the whole process. So that's kind of where our broad strategic approach on recycling is coming from. And then as far as the actual detail of that is concerned, going forwards, there's sort of three distinct areas of waste we're looking at. One is, and it's called simpler recycling. One of them is the dry recyclables, the paper, the card, the glass, that kind of thing, stuff that can all be in one thing together. The other is the sort of the stuff that we can't recycle, what we put in our black sacks at the moment. And then the third is the green waste. Now that green waste, as of 2025, if I'm correct with the legislation, will be kitchen waste has to be collected by the councils. So we'll be doing that. I'm knocking at Ruth and she's nodding, and so I'm getting my dates right. And so we'll be doing that alongside our brown bins. And how we collate the brown bins for garden recycling and kitchen waste is something that we're working on now, because we're going to have to do it. So that will certainly, that simpler recycling process will certainly up the rates of recycling going forward. And that's all going to be formed part of this waste strategy. And the details of that are just being worked out as we speak. So that'll be emerging soon. And then your final point was about bus routes. Again, this is something that I'll be honest with you, it's been ignored by this authority for a long time, in my personal view. I'm passionate about buses, as some of my colleagues know, and I think that one of the things that we haven't done, I think the bus routes that I've been looking at, some of them, they've been around for 20 years and not looked at. There's a whole issue around transport for schools and how we get the rural areas incorporated within our transport network, and also in terms of decarbonisation as well. So what we've done in the last few months, had some long conversations with the bus companies, and we actually have a bus workshop coming up at the just to begin into in February. Where we'll have the bus companies around the table, and we'll talk to them about how they think they can deliver a much more efficient and more sort of affordable and accessible bus service than we've got at the moment. I mean, certainly I get a lot of emails from people who say they've been waiting for 3 hours for a bus and it never showed up and stuff like that. And my own family had an experience not long ago when they were stood at Blue Water for about 2 hours waiting for something to turn up, and it never came in the end. So there's that kind of experience which is quite common now. So it's about talking to the bus companies about their services and what they can provide. It splits into two areas, really. There's the subsidised routes, that we get a lump of money from the government through the Department for Transport, and we give subsidies to the bus companies to run particular routes that are really important. We're looking at those, and are they efficient enough? Do they serve our employment areas? Do they serve our schools? Do they serve the university? We've had a lot of complaints from students who say the buses don't work for them, so we're looking at that. And do they serve the the health professional area as well, the health centres and hospital and stuff like that. So there's the key routes that we have in mind, which we will have a map of, which we're producing. So this sort of approach to how we deliver public transport generally is something that we've been unravelling. It's not good, it hasn't been good for a long time, and it's something we're addressing. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Curry, for your report and for all your efforts you do on behalf of the residents. Thank you very much. My first question, actually, I only have two, is on page 22, item 410, regarding the former golf course at Deangate, which is coming up for planning to a community parkland. In that chapter, you're saying it's the application covers 43.3% of the former golf course. The former golf course was actually 70 hectares. So by my secondary school mathematics, that's about 60%. So there's 40% we're not sure what you're doing with it.
Sorry?
Right, the application for your parkland totals 43.3 hectares. Deangate Ridge Golf Course was 70 hectares. So you're using 60% of it. The worry I have, and others would have, which is what's going to happen to the other 40%.
Right. Okay, that's a very good question. I've got the feeling that, are you talking hectares and acres difference there? I think the 43...
No,
you've done the maths.
I've done the maths.
Okay, I trust you.
100 of who secondary school?
That's fine. I'm going to have to check that.
Okay.
You know, so that's something I don't know the answer to, so I'll have to come back to you on that one, but I will do.
Okay.
I'll come back with an answer on that one.
And my second question is page 26, paragraph 6.6, where you go on to talk about ANOBs and the Kent Downs. I just wonder, have you had any feedback at all or contact with the plan for the East Coast Wetlands, the World Heritage Site?
I have, yes. We passed a motion at full council on that not long ago, and I've also discussed it with RSPB, who are behind the initiative there. It's a very exciting project. It's something that I think we should fully embrace, and we have done through the council motion, which was brought by I can't remember which council, it was brought by another of your colleagues, I think, out on the peninsula. And I think that the main thing about that is it's a recognition of how important this area is, not just from a bird point of view, because obviously that's the key thing about it being the flyway for the East Atlantic, but I think also from a cultural and heritage point of view and from a community point of view as well. I mean, those communities out there, they serve a huge, the farming communities and such like, really important aspect of Medway's culture and history and stuff like that. So there's a whole host of reasons why it's a good thing to do. And I think on top of that, and that's something that we're really looking into in a lot of detail now, particularly since Haven Holidays have expanded the facility at All Hallows, is green tourism. There's a huge market there, which we've been looking at in some detail. You can travel down a lot of the Haven. I've spoken to Haven Holidays, and they're very interested. A lot of the people who use their mobile home facilities there and the brand new facility, which is quite an exciting place to go, they come down from London. And it takes about 2 hours to come from London to All Hallows if you do it right, and if we had an electric bus running from Strood station, it'd be even quicker, and they'd come by train. And I think there's a real opportunity for some green tourism going on there, and if it had UNESCO status as well, even better. So it's quite an exciting thing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your report. Just one question. You talked about the waste strategy, and you also in your report you refer to the carrying on doing the weekly collection. Does your waste, just like a bit of clarification really, your waste strategy, does it include collecting each item as we do now weekly?
The answer is yes to that. Yeah. So I don't think more to say. Thank you.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. Just wanted to compliment you on the immense amount of work you've done since coming into post. It's really great to see progress, particularly on the climate emergency work and really focusing our attention on sustainability and actually what's happening now and future generations. Got a couple of questions related to that. In terms of the bus workshop that's coming up, I think it's really important that we look at ensuring that the routes are as inclusive and that as many people as possible are able to access services that meet their needs. I think at the moment it's quite clear that that's clearly not happening in terms of how our transport has been designed across the whole of Medway. It's very difficult to organise journeys using public transport, which don't take considerable periods of time, and for many people, time is a precious commodity. I was wondering, with regard to that then, have you or have the teams involved looked at really best practice cities and large urban areas such as Freiburg, which is clearly a global standard in terms of integrated and sustainable transport? That's my first question. The second question relates maybe to behavioural change. Obviously, encouraging people to use more public transport, to embrace active travel, also involves behavioural change, but I wanted to pick up on page 27. Let me just get to the point. It's right at the bottom. 7.6, where whilst many people are very keen to use the brown bins for garden waste, with 90% of garden waste being correctly recycled, it's quite concerning that the same is not happening in terms of food waste and recycling more generally. And whilst I acknowledge the great work that the environmental engagement team are doing, what else can be done to encourage our residents to increase the recycling of different items, particularly food waste, which is going to landfill and significantly concerning. Also in light of the fact that it leads to littering with the black sacks being left out on streets. It creates a lot of public health issues as well. Thanks. And my final question, I always get an extra one in. You talk about, in terms of the strategies that you're evolving, I'm wondering how much consideration has been given to encouraging business to embrace the circular economy rather than the wasteful current approaches that many businesses continue to employ in their practices.
Okay, thank you very much. Covering the ground quite nicely there. I think, I mean, obviously, with regard to the buses, I've already mentioned how important that is, and we've got the workshop coming up. We're talking to the bus companies, and the staff have been working extremely hard on looking at how the routes can be improved and such like. And best practice, I mean, there's a number of really good examples of best practice. You mentioned Freiburg. I've looked at that one. And there's actually some really good ones in London. I mean, I don't know if you've been around the Borough Market area in London and London Bridge around there. I mean, on some days it's almost car-free. It's just electric vehicles moving around quietly, humming about, and loads of people walking. And that's really where this comes in, I think. I mean, ideally, we'd love to see places like Intra and some of our town centres where people didn't need to travel even in a bus. They could just walk and such like. And I'll touch on that in a moment. But I think also it's about making sure that we provide our rural services as well. A lot of the villages out on the peninsula and down the Cuxton Valley, people there do feel isolated. They have really poor services. And again, it's how we deal with that. And maybe some sort of smaller buses and stuff like that. Talking to the smaller companies like New Venture and ASD, they're quite happy to engage in that process. So best practice is in there. One other good example of best practice, which I really love, there's one case in Japan and another one in Australia of trackless trams, which I've got a real fondness for. For not much money in the grand scheme of things, you can introduce a trackless tram system into your town centres, which cover several kilometres of road. So there's all sorts of, like you say, really good examples of how we can take that forward, and that's certainly part of our thinking. And I think the other part of that is you mentioned active travel. We're just literally this week, we've launched our walking and cycling infrastructure plan consultation. That's gone out, it's available, you can access it through the website. And that's about encouraging people to walk and cycle more, and how we can improve the network of paths and cycleways that we have in order to do that. And so it's a really sort of important piece. And if you look, I mean, going back to sort of areas of London, people don't drive hardly at all. I know a lot of people who live in London who don't own a car anymore because it's just too congested. And if we're reducing congestion and encouraging more cycling and walking and bus travel, it's a win-win. Just on the bus issue, one thing we did manage to secure through our bus service improvement plan was about £700,000 grant from the Department for Transport. We've used that for free travel just before Christmas, and we're looking at how we can provide some more services in sort of in the Easter holidays and the summer holidays aimed at young people. If you can get young people engaged with jumping on a bus rather than relying on mum and dad to drive them or whatever, suddenly you're opening up the door for them for more freedom to travel how they like, and you're introducing that at a very early age for people to want to travel in that way for the rest of their lives. So that's the bus issue. On the waste and recycling, I think you're right. I mean, we actually recycle virtually everything we throw out because it goes to the incinerators. And technically that's called recycling. It does waste to energy, does generate energy, and it means we're not going to landfill with the waste, which is a good thing. However, composting is really the key when it comes to green waste of any sort. And it's got a lot of value as well. So if we can get the composting regimes up, I mean, I certainly do that with my kitchen waste. I've got a small back garden, but I've got a compost heap at the back, and that's where my veg go, when the bits of the veg that I don't eat go and stuff like that. So a lot of people could be encouraged to do more of that. And I think also in terms of the regulations that are changing in the next couple of years, there'll be more collection of kitchen wastes coming in as a matter of course. And in that respect, we're relying, a great job that's being done by our climate change team, the officers who are working on that. We've set up two new working groups, one for members, cross-party, with their own recycling and their with their own ward improvement plans for that sort of thing. And that's certainly one way of getting the message out to the community is through your work with your communities, where your councillors, you'll be challenged to say, go out there and tell people to recycle more, and we'll provide the support you need to do that. And then we've got our community working group. That represents a huge number of the community groups across Medway. MVA are part of that. We've got the Army involved. We've got obviously the eco hubs and friends groups and other community organisations are represented in that. And they're constantly messaging on all the social media about how we can do better for the planet, and that includes the recycling message as well. So we're doing as much as we can to get that message into people's heads that actually it's not that complicated, it's not that difficult, as long as you know what to do and how to do it, it's there. So hopefully I've covered that point reasonably well for you. And then finally on the business economy, again, that's really important aspect of what we're trying to do, and I'm working very closely with Councillor Edwards, who's my colleague on the business side of things. So we've got the Town Centre Board that was set up a few years ago, which we're keeping going. The Town Centre forums are operating more smoothly now, I like to think, and getting that message out to business. And again, we do engage with the business community through the climate change working group as well. So we're kind of trying to address that issue as best we can with that circular economy idea. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doe.
Well, thank you very much for the report, Councillor Curry. There's just a couple of things I'd like to take up. The first is that I think in the last few months, we've been absolutely plagued by people with roadworks. They've gone absolutely mad. And I can understand it if it were filling in potholes, but it isn't. It's a lot of them are, say, UK Power and so on. And it seems to me that I mean, some of them have been fined, for example, for just going ahead and doing it. And I just wonder whether we could improve. I'm not suggesting there's any magic thing about this, but I think over a period we ought to try and work to improve the coordination between the agencies, because quite honestly, there must be an awful lot of waste inherent in this business of, filling up holes and so on, and then going in, say, 3 weeks later and digging the same hole and so on. And it seems to me that there are economies there that could be made. And there are also, of course, I think it's very serious in traffic congestion. I mean, I know someone, for example, that complained to me that within a mile they had 4 roadworks, you know, so I mean, no wonder they were going balmy. But so I wonder if that could be looked at, please. I'm very grateful if it would. The other thing which I wanted to stress is in 411, where you're talking about Temple Marsh. As you know, Temple Marsh on one side has got the lovely view across the Medway towards the cathedral. On the other side, there is, of course, our Knight Templar building, the Temple Manor. And what I wondered whether we could ask you to do, if you're looking at the planning situation on this, I pressed this for when I was there, but I think that we need to take a chance to actually deal with Temple Manor in the right way as part of the infrastructure there. Because at the moment, it's sort of marooned in an industrial environment. And actually, if you had it approached from the other side, the side of Temple Marsh, and so on, then I think you could make much more of it and screen it from the centre. And it could be really enjoy a much greater footfall than it does at the moment. It's a terrific asset, but one that most people don't even get to see. And I think that's a great shame.
No, thank you very much for the case. I mean, they are really important. They're 2 key areas, really. I think I'll talk about the roadworks first and the issues around that. Obviously, I mean, as you know from your own experience, managing the road network in Medway is not easy. It's complex, and it involves a lot of agency cross-working, if you like. And we've noticed that there's a lot of complaints about people saying, well, one week it's the gas company digging up and they say it's an emergency. Following week it's the cable company putting in 5G or that kind of thing. And that is certainly an issue. We are doing the best we can. We've got a team of really brilliant highways officers who've got a lot of experience of managing issues like this. But it's a huge network. I think it's, from the square metres, I think it's about 5 million square metres of roadway in Medway. So there is a lot of roadway to be looked after and maintained, and I mean it's worth about £2 billion, I think, in terms of its infrastructure costs alone. I think you probably know these figures yourself, and I think how we manage that and how we maintain that is always going to be complex and difficult. And in some areas it will get difficult. We're dealing with the road infrastructure management plan from the previous year, so obviously not had a great deal of control over what's happened in the last sort of 7 or 8 months. So there is that, and there's obviously the pothole issue on top of everything else. And as I say in my report, that's about lack of infrastructure investment that's been going on for years and years and years, and councils have been crying out for support from government on this, and they've not had it, and it's created a lot of problems for us. We're looking at different solutions to speed up the process of potholes, so we're looking at technological solutions, as you've seen from my report, and brilliant schemes like where you can put a camera on the front of a 3D camera on the front of a waste lorry, and it can record the depth of a pothole as it drives past. Things like that is quite exciting technology that will really make a difference in that respect. So we are addressing those issues, but I absolutely agree, it's still complex, it's still difficult to manage, and we're doing what we can to address that. Moving on to Temple Marsh, that's an exciting project. I've been involved in that area of land for a number of years for different reasons, so I know it quite well. It's an old waste tip that's gassing still, which is makes it quite difficult. There's methane gas coming off it, so it's not safe to build anything on it. It does have a very high wildlife value. It's also subject to flooding with the higher tides we're getting with the climate change issue coming in. There's water coming up over it. So turning that area into public open space, creating a park for the new residents who are going to be living around there is an exciting project that's actually now happening, which is good news. Linking that to Temple Marsh, Temple Manor is kind of outside my portfolio. That falls under Councillor Mahill's portfolio, the cultural side of things. However, we do talk, we've not talked specifically about this, but within the context of the river strategy, which is going to be coming out, a draft will be out in the next couple of months on that, which we're working on, and something that started under your administration. The river strategy will cover access and walking along both sides of the river. covers, so it'll be through Temple Marsh, and there'll be a links into Temple Manor as well from a walking point of view. So there's a lot of work to be done. As you know, all that boat yards and stuff like that between the bridge and Temple Marsh, there's a lot of issues around there that need to be addressed as well, and that's about land ownership. So it's a complex picture, but I agree with you. We could make a lot more of Temple Manor, and that's something I'll certainly pick up with my colleague, Councillor Mahill, on that one.
Councillor Hubbard.
Just going to call it back up. Hi. Hello, Simon. So you've got a huge portfolio, and I know you're incredibly busy all the time. And thank you for mentioning me in your report. And so I'm not going to talk about planning because you and I get fed up. Not fed up with talking planning, but we enjoy talking about planning, and it's going to progress the local plan, and it's going to come rapidly upon us very soon. What I want to talk about is green spaces. So when you're an elevated officer back in Rochester, and before you became a mayor councillor, you would take us councillors on a walk around Capstan Country Park. So I know you're very passionate about our various green spaces. I'm quite sure that Councillor Filmer and Councillor Goulburn went on those walks as I did. It was, round on a summer night, regularly every year. So we've got and you mentioned in your report about the success of green flags and such like, and that depends on delivery through green spaces. And the local Friends group, to me, that's the Friends of Broomhill, which of course I helped set up back in 2005, they are, when you say you oversee green spaces delivered by 100 Medway North employees, the problem that I'm hearing is the fact that the communication between Norse and the green spaces, the Friends groups, is deteriorated. It's not particularly good, and they're not quite sure how to progress things like how to get a tree addressed or etc. And of course there's money issues as well. So I want to know your feelings about how we can look to improve matters for our green spaces and working with the Friends, and how Norse can better integrate with the Friends groups especially.
Thank you very much. Yes, and it's a long time since I was looking after Capstan. That was another life away, I think, mainly, but good memories as well. Thank you very much. And I think dealing with the Friends groups generally, I just sort of mentioned how important they are. I mean, there's 22 groups, and we've got a couple more that we could be starting up very soon as well, which is quite exciting. So there is, and I think they provide about 16,000 hours a year of voluntary time into the management and care of our green spaces. So they're a big part of our community, and always open for people looking for an active and more sort of outdoors way of life. Then certainly join your Friends group is the message there. And I think that the work that they've done, supported by our green spaces team and the offices, now has been brilliant actually. But they are a small team. And that's one of the problems with across the council. As we know, in all councils, we don't have enough staff to do all the things we'd love to do. And the council green spaces team is only a few officers doing the best they can. And the council manages about 1,900 hectares of land in total. So the partnership with Norse is absolutely crucial in how we do that. And I think, so comms is never going to be perfect because Norse are so stretched themselves in managing that area of land within the budgets that we provide. So there's always room for improvement. And I think you're right. I think there has been some moments when the comms has not been as good as it should be. And that's something I've certainly spoken with them about. In fact, I had a Norse meeting last week about a number of different issues. And so we are covering that area of it. And we're certainly looking in detail at the work of Norse and what they do and what they provide for us. And that's something I'm addressing quite closely. So the answer to your question is it's not perfect. It's a lot of work. We have got limited resources, but we're doing the best we can within the areas that we're covering. I hope that covers your points.
Yes. Thank you. It does, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Hine.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, sorry. It's the force of habit, which is sometimes hard to break. Good evening, Councillor Curry, and my question is regarding 4.8 in your report. The Council's support for the 22 Friends and volunteer groups, which is encouraging to see. But I specifically wanted to ask you about the Lorded and Walderslade community group. as you all know, the group disbanded back in September last year, and we raised it at full council, as you'll remember. I wonder if you've had any further discussions with the group about potentially reforming or coming up with any more suggestions as to how they can continue their work. I remember quite vividly in that council you spoke about making sure that there was equity and fairness with the other groups that the council work with. And I know Councillor Golvin and my colleague, Councillor Lamas, is very keen to work with you and the community group to help them get up and running again if they'd like to, because they do some great work in our ward and in our surrounding area, including Wheatwood and Wayfield and Luton too. So it's not just Lawson and Walderslade they look after, but they do some incredible work, and it's just a shame to see that they've disbanded now. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I totally agree with you. I think that the work that they've done, I mean, they sent me their spreadsheet of stuff. How much they've collected is awesome, to be honest. I mean, they've done an amazing job, particularly during the COVID time as well. So there's no getting away from the fact that they're a brilliant volunteer group and they've done a lot of hugely important work. I think the problem we had with that particular one, I think, as you know, probably know the story, is that the collection regime was different from everybody else, and it was very hard to maintain that for any long for a longer period of time. I mentioned resources a number of times this evening already, where we don't have the staff, we don't have the finances to do that, and actually one of the problems with that particular group was that they did have a much more sort of focused collection regime for the rubbish they were collecting every week, and we were going to change that, and one or two of the members were not happy with the changes, and I accept that. So myself and officers met with the volunteers before Christmas on a couple of occasions. We've met with them to talk about options for the future. Some have decided, as you know, to step down from doing that now, which is, I mean, it's a shame. I'm sorry that they've chosen to do that, but that's their choice. And I do recognise what they've achieved. I mean, there's no getting away. They did a huge amount of work. I'm very grateful to them for that, and the community is as well. We have met with another volunteer before Christmas who was looking at continuing the group in some form or another. I'm still waiting to hear how that might emerge, but I'm hoping it'll pick up. And in particular, what we have got, obviously, every year, with all the other volunteer groups that we operate across Medway, is the Great British Spring Clean. That's coming in March. So hopefully, if the Walderslade team would like to, and I'll certainly email them, I was going to email them anyway, about that, if they want to help out with the Great British Spring Clean, that would be fantastic. So we'll certainly maintain that contact with them, and copied in Councillor Lamas and Councillor Golvin to those meetings as well. So yeah, it'd be good. Thank you.
Councillor Golvin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Curry, for a very comprehensive. On just briefly touching the last issue, yes, very happy to continue working with you because, as you say, resources are very stretched. You know, I think we've got to bend over backwards to try and make sure that we can get the volunteers on board. It's a benefit for everybody with that. So thank you. We'll take that up outside this meeting, no doubt. And thanks to Councillor Hubbard for reminding me. I think I well remember that walk round Capstan, but we won't go into how many years ago that was. But I think it's good to see how Capstan has carried on with that good job as a green lung in a very densely populated area. What I'd like to just touch on, Simon, if I may, is an issue that almost a few years ago I wouldn't have thought I'd be bringing it up on the committee. Certainly Walderslade is, a fair chunk of it, is at the highest point in Medway. You couldn't get any higher than Dargets Wood and some of our roads. And it's been quite an interesting occurrence that Dave Brake and myself are now having to deal with flooding issues. And the one that immediately springs to mind, because it's a good example, is Mackenzie Road. Mackenzie Road, if you looked at it on the Ordnance Survey map and looked at the lines, it's one of the high points of Medway, and yet it is regularly prone to flooding. And I think we'll all accept that climate change now has got to be high up on our agenda, and I think we all accept that one of the consequences of climate change is we are getting more extreme rainfall. In fact, some of the rain we've had over the last few months, the only other time I've seen such heavy rainfall was in the tropics. So it gives an indication of how bad. Going back to Mackenzie Road, not the last time it flooded or the time before, after visiting one of the homes that had unfortunately been flooded out, I took a walk round the adjacent area. I only walked probably 150, 200 yards. But what I noticed was that in that small area, the vast majority of the front gardens had been paved over. One can understand that because parking's difficult in our urban areas. I can understand why people would pave their gardens over so they could get their vehicles off the road. But unfortunately, what's happened is in the majority of those cases where the gardens have been paved, there has been no provision, with a French drain or anything, to cope with the water that's coming off that paved area. So what's happening is the water goes off out of the front of the property, across the footpath and into the road. And then it proceeds to find the lowest point. Water has a habit of doing that. And the lowest point is somebody's home. So as we've got the local plan come out, and the local plan is not just about housing provision and all the rest of it, although we seem to concentrate, I think there's an opportunity to try and put something in the local plan where we can control these to make sure where people do pave, there is adequate drainage provided. Because unfortunately, if we don't do that, lots and lots of people are going to suffer. So I'd welcome if you'd commit to working to try and do something on the local plan to address this urban flooding issue, please. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, I can come back on that. And thank you very much, Adrian. It's a hugely important issue. And I just want to take a slight sideways movement, if I may, Chair. Just the last couple of weeks, I've taken on the chairing of the North Kent Marshes Inland Drainage Board, and Gary is the previous chair. So I'd just like to say my thanks to Councillor Etheridge for, is it 5 years he spent as the chair of that board? Did an amazing job. Longer, even longer than that, apologies, yeah. And everybody on that committee, on the drainage board, a lot of good things to say about Gary's role as the chair of that board. So a big thank you to him. I think you're right. The role of how flooding affects our communities is quite terrible. I have it in my own ward, as you know, parts of Luton flood pretty much every winter now. There was supposed to be once in every 20-year events or something like that. It's pretty much every year now. And the part of the reason for that, as you rightly said, is the sheer volume of water that comes down in one go, and the drains, a lot of them Victorian, just back up and can't cope, and up it pops, and then it floods people's houses. And some of my residents along Nelson Terrace had to be evacuated before Christmas on that, and you've experienced it as well. So I think that we have a flood officer who's responsible for that. Gabby, she's in the planning team, and there's a lot of work that goes on through there in relation to the drainage issues generally. We have the representations on the drainage boards now as well. Addressing it in a local plan is really important. So the answer is yes, it'd be good to talk to you more about that and getting the right policies in there. And the role of new developers, particularly in parts of Kent, where we know the flooding is bad, is key. And getting the sustainable urban drainage systems in place, the SUDs, as they call them, getting those right is really important. So all those issues are hugely important. I just want to touch briefly, you mentioned about climate change being an issue. It is certainly an issue. And the opposite is happening in the summer for a lot of the farmers out on the marshes, where their fields are dry. for months on end, and they need the water to come in for the animals and stuff like that. So they've got really wet winters and very dry summers, and it's not a good place to be if you're a farmer. So the impact of the climate change is happening on all aspects of our community, and how we manage our water through the system as it floods onto the high point of the North Downs up near Walderslade and stuff like that. It floods, then it all ends up in the River Medway or the River Thames or the North Sea. That's where it's all going as it pours through our through the area, and how we manage that and the pace that the water moves is really important. And there are some nature-based solutions that work really well, which we should do. A lot more tree planting would help a lot, particularly on the higher ground, where that trees hold the water back, and getting the right kind of drainage systems in place along the River Medway is really important as well. And we've got a lot to worry about. I'm also a member of the Regional Coastal Flood and Coastal Committee for the South East region. I'm on that board as well, and we're looking at all the really expensive capital projects that have to be done all around the South Coast, and there's coming in Medway as well going forward. So it's not cheap. It's life-changing for many people, and it's getting worse as the climate issues get worse. So you're absolutely right. It needs to be built into all our policies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Field.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your very comprehensive report tonight, Councillor Curry. It's been good to read, and obviously you've got an extensive portfolio. I just want to associate with Councillor Galvin's point around surface drainage and the need for us to embed more sustainable urban drainage systems in whatever development we promote and we see from developers as well. A number of my colleagues have mentioned the bus network. I love to bang on about buses, but I just want to say, you know, not a specific question on that, but I think it's clear that you know, the attitude of a laissez-faire attitude towards buses in Medway has failed the Medway towns, and we need a more interventionist ability. Now, obviously, at the moment, you know, with funding and with the budgets and with the lack of national government funding, that's going to be difficult, but it's certainly something that we should be looking towards over the next few years. And, you know, I've had recent painful experiences of waiting an hour and a half in the freezing cold Chatham bus station on Saturday with 2 young kids to prove it. So, you know, any opportunity to improve services would be great. The question that I really want to ask around is 20 miles an hour zones. I've seen you've just announced, obviously, the consultation for the active travel improvements, and I know one in my ward is around Bill Street Road and around Calling Road, where you propose a 20 mile an hour speed limit as part of the proposals. One key road that we're interested in and residents have raised with us is Cliff Road. And we've raised Cliff Road through questions, but generally the answers have been, well, we need to wait for data, we need to wait for accidents, we need to wait for serious injuries to come through. I'm just thinking that perhaps, again, he says more interventionist, but, you know, for some of our urban areas, particularly those that are Victorian urban grain with terraces, with increased size of vehicles, you know, there was some quite startling research today about how children just aren't playing outside enough these days and not getting enough activity. One of the big fears that people speak about is, you know, the danger that children can have walking around, and I just wonder whether there is kind of a bit more that we can do to make sure support we're a child-friendly Medway, to improve air quality, to get more people walking and cycling, whether there is actually, not everywhere, that there are many roads that are not suitable for 20 miles an hour in the towns, but in some of our residential areas that we probably should be looking at a more progressive approach in terms of 20 mile an hours, and it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. It's a huge area that covers a lot of ground. I think, I mean, I'm trying to think where best start off from. I mean, there's a lot of towns, I think Glasgow does a 20 is plenty sign, where it's not an enforced thing, it's a green circle around it rather than a red, and they do it that way. I think there are questions over whether you need to if the traffic is only moving at 10 miles an hour because it's so much congestion and it's so narrow. Anyway, a lot of the traffic isn't moving above 20 miles an hour. And actually what tends to happen in some parts, and certainly I know in my own ward in Luton, Luton Road, its worst problem is late at night when they travel along there at 50 miles an hour in order to avoid the police or whatever. That's when the accidents happen. And that's not really related to the daily use of that road. It's just because it's an easy rat run for whatever reasons. So I think there's a number of complex issues around the introduction of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, and you talk to different highways officers and you get 3 different answers, as you probably know. So I think there is that around, but it's certainly worth looking at, and certainly worth part of our strategic approach to how we deal with the underlying issue, which every town thinks is congestion, and how we manage congestion. And is it going to get worse? Medway has got, in the local plan that's coming up, the forthcoming local plan, and everybody knows the figures, something in the region of 28,500 houses. That is about, I don't know, 50,000 more people. That's probably about 20,000 more cars at least, if not more, coming our way between now and 2040. And how we manage that volume of traffic is really important, particularly when we know roads like the A2 are already at capacity. So there is an issue around congestion and how we manage congestion in relation to that. And making it safer and more friendly to cycle and walk is a key part of that. If you don't drive, you're not using your car, that's one more car off the road. So that's where the cycling and walking initiative that we've just launched this week really is important. And that's important from a health point of view. Less pollution is caused by the fewer cars, and people out walking more is a lot healthier approach to life generally. Similarly with the school run and stuff like that, a lot of children are driven to school because either parents are jumping in their car and dropping them off. And I remember when my children were little, some of their friends would be delivered at school, and we actually lived further away and we were walking. So, I mean, that goes on. Equally, some parents have got to get to work, so they're dropping their children off and going on to work. So there's a whole host of reasons how we can make getting to school for children, that massive school run, which happens twice a day, a lot better. And we're doing that through our School Streets initiative, for example. So there is measures we can take. There's measures we are taking to try and reduce congestion, and that will lead to the safer roads we want. And the 20-mile-an-hour limit is one of those measures as well, one of the tools in our toolbox, if you like, that we can use. I think, hopefully I've covered that point then for you. Was there another question in there?
No, but I was referring to a very specific example of Cliff Road where we've seen some pretty horrific collisions. For instance, there was a bus shelter taken out at the beginning of last year where there's not necessarily been the impetus, it feels like, to actually review appropriate speeds on those roads.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Curry, for your report. And thank you for your kind words. I just want to bring your attention to the area where you talk about regeneration. And I suspect there are very few councillors at all that can remember some of this, but Councillor Hubbard certainly will. When Tesco's in Strood was due for its expansion, it was also going to take over the commercial site of what was then Smith's Sand and the Temple car park. When that fell through, Smith's Sand got sold off and became a cars sales showroom. And that left us with Temple Car Park. So I'm certainly aware both I and Councillor Hubbard attended the Town Centre forums and other planning committees, where it was suggested that pods on stilts could be put on that car park to ensure that we had continued with that regeneration of Strood, letting them out either to small businesses, start-up businesses, and even possibly with a double pod that they became accommodation, with the car park still available underneath those pods. So I'm just wondering if it's possible you could revisit that, rather than selling off an asset, actually make that asset worthwhile to the council. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much for your question. I mean, I think in terms of town centre management, generally speaking, obviously the town centre board is there for that purpose. There is a Strood town centre plan as well, which is in there. And I know that there's certain developers who are very interested in that area as well. So there is a number of things that can be done to make improvements there. As far as selling off the assets in there, some of them, it depends on the nature of the asset, and that kind of sits not within my portfolio. I mean, when it comes to parking, I'm there to sort of make sure parking is available rather than the asset management side of it. So I can't talk too much about that because it sits outside my portfolio. But the main thing about the regeneration aspect of it, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's key. We can't just sort of sit back and let. I mean, Strood town centre is one of our most sort of successful town centres in many respects for various reasons in terms of the economy, the local economy there, and obviously, you know, just in the last few weeks, we're putting a lot more into Chatham, and that's something that you were doing when you were in control of the council not that long ago. Chatham has received a lot of attention, and Gillingham again needs more investment equally. So putting energy and effort into our town centre and the regeneration of them is something that we want to continue that work that you were doing. So I think there is that aspect of it. Anything else in there that you want me to cover? I mean, it's an ongoing thing. You can't stop regenerating. You've got to keep it. It's a forever project, if you like. If you sit back, things start to decay, and you've got to keep keep the circular economy moving. I think it was mentioned about the circular business and stuff like that. Okay.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. Again, lots has been said. I won't go over things that have been said already, other than to say, again, a massive thank you to yourself and also to Ruth and the team, because I know certainly in that day-to-day work as councillors, writing to frontline services is such a crucial part, and those quick responses are really appreciated. One particular quick response is in terms of clearing fly tipping. And that's done so quickly, and residents I know are really grateful when they've raised something and it's removed. And that was really what I wanted to ask more on. We've talked about volunteers and litter already, but that kind of whole mentioned in 3.22 and 8.4 around street cleansing and the strategy there. Because again, one of the biggest concerns which is in my inbox from residents is always about what the community looks and feels like. And so I just wanted to explore a little bit more about the strategy around collecting waste, clearing the streets, cleaning the streets, and how frequently that's looked at and what the strategy for that is, just to reassure our residents that we really are looking at reducing the problem of litter as much as we possibly can. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. It's hugely important. Again, I mean, not just in terms of how it looks, but also in terms of some of the health and well-being issues generally. And I know that you know, there are issues around the use of black sacks. There's no getting away from that. If you put your sack out the night before, there's a good chance the foxes will see if they can find some food in it. And then that creates a lot of the litter. Certainly, that is a problem. And I think that is exacerbated where you've got blocks of flats and poor litter collection. So it's not a simple solution in terms of how we manage and maintain that. Keeping the weekly collections going is key as well, so we've got to maintain that side of it as well. So I think there's a lot of responsibility falls upon the householders to put the rubbish out at the right time. I mean, I know that sounds challenging, but people have got to be conscious of the fact that if you put it out the night before, you're going to have litter in your area. I mean, that's as simple as that. So there is that issue. I think the other thing, you talk about fly tipping. Again, I mean, I don't want to sound harsh, but if you're a householder wanting to clear out rubbish from your house, then don't give it to a guy in a white van who's got no license to get rid of waste. Use a licensed process to get rid of it, or use our bulky waste collection, which is available as well. So there is issues around how people dispose of their own waste and take responsibility for it as well. Equally, the council's role is fundamental, and how we deal with it, and that's something that we're looking at. The street cleansing is not perfect. Certainly in our town centres, it's a problem. But even in sort of the other areas like your own ward up in Wiswood, there are still a lot of issues around how we go about doing that, and that's certainly something that's part of our waste strategy and how we manage and maintain our areas like that. So it's in the mix. It's not a simple solution to sorting it out, but it's certainly there, high up in our thinking. Hopefully I've covered your point. Come back if you like.
Yeah, I think that's the request really, exactly that, the high up in the thinking and just the reassurance that, you know, all strategy is being constantly reviewed on that area. So thank you very much.
Just one thing which I just came back to me. I saw this week, in fact, was one of the new deep cleansing machines that's been bought by Norse. And this one's got a massive hoover on the side of it, and he gets into the deepest corners in some of the places that haven't been touched, which is really exciting. So that's a new piece of kit that's coming into play now, provided by Norse. And one other thing I would like to say, again, you mentioned the volunteers. That's something that they're brilliant at. I know I've worked with groups in my own ward in Luton, but at places like Connie Banks and stuff like that, where there's a legacy rubbish that's been left for years untouched, and the volunteers are getting in and pulling it out. And there's certainly the Walderslade and Lordswood litter, because that's a good example of where they've done a huge amount of important work going into the woodland areas around Walderslade and getting the rubbish that's been sitting there for a long time. So that's a good thing to say.
Any other member? In which case, Councillor Curry, if you don't mind, a couple of questions from me, and by a couple I actually mean three. So a couple of them are related though. So at page 23.20, we talk about parking being considered in the local plan. You know, the example I would give of a lack of foresight in sort of parking planning is the Rochester Station multi-storey, which regularly now is full to capacity long before 9 o'clock in the morning. So it's certainly out of bounds for anyone with the luxury of trying to use a network rail card later in the day. You know, it's through the week there are some days where it's simply no go, and you know, we don't have a time machine, but what we can do is make sure that the planning for parking going forward is realistic, because I think it's really unfortunate that car park is frankly missing out on potential income from commuters, not to mention inconveniencing those who are relying on it to catch a particular train. Equally, you know, we have sort of really unsightly car parks in Rochester, like Blue Boar Lane, which occupies this prime site in the centre of Rochester, which we get a glimpse of what it could be on the third Sunday of every month when we have the farmers market there, and we are able to close off sections of it for pedestrians. You know, and it's a great missed opportunity not to have a town square or any sort of open space that people can congregate. And you know, that's thinking out loud, but I'll throw that one out there. Related to that is the active travel discussion. I think that's at 3.18. On page 20, where we talk about active travel initiatives. I think what we have, though, when we talk about cycling and walking in one fell swoop, you've actually got two competing interests there, potentially, and I speak as a motorist, an occasional cyclist, and an always walker. You know, and to highlight some of the concerns that are raised to me by residents on National Cycle Route 1, which is a shared path along Corporation Street in Rochester. Actually, the use of that as a shared cycle and pedestrian path curtails the active travel by a lot of elderly residents who have spoken to me about it, including one lady who, you know, does her best despite walking with a frame to get in her 10,000 steps every day. But to do that, she has to, you know, dodge cyclists sometimes travelling at speed, and you know, I don't know what we can do to police the sharing of the space, but certainly it doesn't seem to me that those shared paths are an ideal solution, and so you know, that's certainly something that I hope any sort of active travel strategy takes into consideration. And finally, just on allotments, that's on page 22, 4.6. You talk about an open space study. Obviously, there is a massive dearth of allotments for those who wish to have one. Certainly, it's something that my family were on the waiting list for, I think, in excess of 10 years, because we were looking to get onto a specific site that was near where we live. And there might be turnover to a greater degree on some of the larger sites. Is there anything that we can do actively, not just at the point where an allotment is given up by the tenant, to encourage people to split the allotment they do hold. I know that that's certainly something that happens when an allotment becomes vacant, but so many of these allotments are actually quite a lot for one person or one family to handle. Is there any way we can incentivise that, not as people giving something up, but as someone being community spirited and, you know, ensuring that as many people in the community are able to share in the benefit of the health-giving benefits that an allotment can give?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think just going back up to what you're saying about the availability of parking and the multi-storey in the centre of Rochester, I mean, I think that's a really important issue, because on the one hand, we're trying to encourage people not to drive as much, but equally, we do still have to provide the parking for when they do. And I think that's something certainly for the town centre forums to be looking at, and the town centre board will be looking at. And I think that in that respect, it's about sort of having the right data about the volume of traffic. And I think in the situation in Rochester is a good example of how do you find that right balance between providing enough parking, and actually the Blue Ball Lane site is ideal for a market square or something like that. It'd be lovely, wouldn't it, on a Saturday? But where would all the cars go if they couldn't park there on a Saturday? And I know it gets really busy around there. Most days, actually, it's pretty busy. So I think you're right, getting that balance right between the provision of parking and encouraging people not to drive is something we're doing. And that's where we go back to the conversation we were having a bit earlier this evening about the buses. If we can provide a really good, sound, affordable, accessible, for all, and regular, good quality bus service, then that would reduce the volume of traffic. I mean, I mentioned the idea of trackless trams. Some of the data on that shows that a trackless tram route put into a town centre can reduce the volume of traffic by up to 18% on some roads. That's how good these things are once they're installed and they're being used. So there is this sort of combination of policies around active travel that come together in terms of the buses and the congestion issues and the parking issues all working together. And that's a challenge, and it's not going to be done overnight. It'll take us time to get there, but we're on that journey now, and the new walking and cycling infrastructure plan is part of that as well, because if you don't jump in your car but choose to walk or cycle instead, it's another, as I said before, it's another car off the road. And in that respect, you're right, getting that right then in terms of the combined paths is an issue. And it's dangerous. I mean, some pedestrians feel unsafe walking on busy roads, whether it's a bike or a car, it doesn't really matter. If you're an elderly person and you're walking down a road and there's a cycle lane and they shoot past you at 30 miles an hour, it still feels unsafe. So getting that right. And I'd certainly encourage all members in the room here to put their views in. The consultation is open. Send in your views and we'll take them on board from that point of view. So please do that. And again, with the active travel thing, again, it's about health and fitness. There's a real sort of health and well-being issue around that. The more you walk, I do a lot of walking. That's something that I've always done, and it certainly keeps my brain clearer. If I can just take that extra 20 minutes to walk to Gunwall from my home rather than jumping in the car and driving, actually I feel better for it, you know, and walking back's not a problem either. So I think that's the kind of thing we need to do. It's changing mindsets and changing the culture around that, and that's what these initiatives are about. On the allotment issue, where do you want me to begin? It's quite a challenging thing. There are about 2,000 people on the waiting list for allotments at the moment. The allotment sites are really well managed in the main. Norse do a good job using the rangers from the country park and the staff involved from there. And obviously the allotment holders themselves take a lot of responsibility. I've met with many of them and I've been to allotment holding meetings and stuff like that. We don't have enough, and how we provide enough is interesting and a real challenge. And I think it's about splitting it into a number of different areas. One is in relation to new developments and saying to developers, and going back to what was mentioned by, I think, Councillor Goldman was talking about the local plan and how we build the right policies into local plans. So a new developer building a new estate will be providing allotments if we can get the policy right for that. So there is that for the new residents coming in, but it still doesn't resolve our existing problem. So we have to look at our allotments, current allotment sites, our current green spaces, and say, can we expand? Can we look at areas of our green spaces that are underused or areas of sites that could be used differently? And a good example would be Cossington Park. And people are aware that the old greenhouse is up there and everything else like that. We've got some funding available for that area. We're looking at putting through 106 funding and stuff like that, so it's not sort of money that's coming out of our coffers, it's money that's coming in from developers to redevelop the greenhouse area up at Cossington, and that will include a tree nursery, and it will also include allotments for the local people as well. So there's exciting ways of doing it, and we've got to be creative about how we do it, but it can be done. Splitting plots, that's done regularly now. If somebody does abandon a plot or move on or whatever, then there's a good chance it'll be halved or even quartered. That's quite important. And one of the other things we've done in a number of sites, or a couple of sites, is like small-scale community allotment sites, where you have a 2-metre square block of you just using old sleepers or whatever to build it up, and then people can hire a small plot just to grow a few veg. And we've got one of those in my own ward in the Arches area. The Arches local team provided that, and I think there's one up at Fort Amherst as well. There's some allotments of a similar. So there's creative ways of doing allotments. We've got a huge backlog to make up. I accept that, and it is a problem. And I apologise that you've been on the waiting list for such a long time. I do hope you come off it soon. But there you go. So hopefully I've covered your points.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Vice Chair, do you have a proposal?
Yep. The committee is asked to note the report.
Is that seconded? Agreed? Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Curry, for answering those questions comprehensively, and thank you for a really wide range of questions covering a lot of the issues that I think fill up our email inboxes on a daily basis. So grateful to members for that. I think at this point, I'm conscious that we are now approaching very close to the 2-hour mark in this meeting, with a substantial part of the agenda still to go. I don't want to keep people waiting any longer than they have to, but I think it might be wise if we adjourn for 5 minutes for a comfort break. I don't want to spring that on our IT professionals, but I think if we can possibly adjourn and resume proceedings at 8:20, that would make for a better agenda item, and probably people sitting more comfortably and asking better questions, which is what we all would like to do. So if that's all right, we'll adjourn for 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, members. I think we all appreciated the opportunity to, at the very least, refresh our coffee cups. We move on now to item 7 on the agenda, the review of the Christmas 2023 waste disposal services on pages 35 to 42 of your agenda pack. I'm really grateful to officers for agreeing to add this to the agenda at quite short notice, but I do think it's really important that the agenda of this committee is flexible enough to adapt to late-breaking stories, as it were, and that we're able to review them in a timely manner when the issue is still fresh in people's minds. And I'm grateful to our partners from Veolia for being here and for officers for compiling that report, which will be introduced by Ian Gilmore.
Thanks, councillors and Chair, for providing us with an opportunity to discuss the issues that presented themselves to us this Christmas and the need to pause waste collections on the 4th and 5th of January. This was an unprecedented decision that was taken in conjunction with our partner, Veolia, and I emphasise the word partner, because although there's a contract, we work together for many years in partnership. And whilst that situation was triggered by a lack of collection hauliers and access to disposal capacity, it needs to be recognised at the same time that it was exacerbated by our Christmas collection methodology that's highlighted in the report. It was necessary to suspend the collections to ensure a number of key issues: that the transfer station stayed within the parameters of its licence, and that waste was not stored in the RCVs, the refuge collection vehicles, overnight outside of that site licence. This ensured that Medway Council stayed lawful in its waste collection operation, and critically, we didn't expose the employees to additional health and safety risks in operating outside their normal operating practices. What happened next was that respite enabled the service to self-right, and it provided its normal excellent service the following week. This prevented any hangover of issues into the following week and increased miscollections, so it allowed us to go back to normal as quickly as possible. There are lessons to be learnt. The wider team, both in Veolia, Norse and the Council, are all trying to get to grips with, so that we take them on board for next year's arrangements. It's also readily acknowledged that in that dynamic situation, some of our communications could have been clearer and better, but that's an inherent issue with making those pieces of information available to the public as it happens. But again, rest assured, the team are taking those on board, and they are a group of people that reflect each year on Christmas, and the things that took place will be taken on board. I hope the report provides you with some clarity on the situation. I would add, and this is me saying this, we need to recognise that there was a huge amount of hard work despite the problems, and there was the commitment by the council staff, Norse colleagues and Veolia, who worked so hard to rectify this situation, working so late, and I'd like that noted. And kind of finally in the comments that I'd make is to express our thanks collectively to the residents of Medway, who overwhelmingly worked with us to manage the impact of this problem and took real responsibility for lots of those problems. As the Chair said, I'm joined by our partners from Veolia, along with Natasha, our Waste Disposal Manager, and we'll willingly try and answer any questions or any issues that you've seen raised.
Thank you, Ian. Any member? Councillor Nesterov.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Just wanted to say that we all can agree that during the Christmas period, some sectors experience heightened strain due to increased consumer activity. People are buying more, consuming more, and waste is no exception. My questions are, is this something that happens every year, or were there any other factors? That was answered that there were factors. If it happens next year, are we going to be more prepared for a situation like that? And the second question is if Veolia facility gets overwhelmed with waste again, is there an alternative facility where Medway waste can go to?
Okay, thanks for the question, and it raises some important points. Part of what we're discussing helps to fix that with this idea of reviewing our methodology about how we plan and we deliver Christmas. In terms of the operation of the waste industry, would it be all right to get some comments from Veolia that explain some of the problems that they're presented with and how we try to manage those?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Yeah, so in terms of the waste transfer station we've got in Medway, it's a transfer station that processes around 150,000 tonnes of waste a year. It's under a lot of peak pressure at Christmas because effectively with the collection methodology as currently configured, that results in double collection days and double the volume coming through the site. And the site doesn't have the capacity to really deal with those kind of volumes on those days. So having worked for Veolia for 10 years now, every Christmas becomes a very big pinch point for us in the operation here. We're on a knife edge every Christmas, and it just happens to be this Christmas, unfortunately. You know, circumstances presented themselves where, for all the reasons that Ian stated, we weren't able to take any more waste through the facility. But I think this has been almost a problem that was inevitably going to happen at some point. Having experienced the last 10 years of collections where it's been very challenging. It puts a lot of strain both on the waste transfer station, the hauliers, the bulk hauliers that are taking waste out of the facility, and also on the downstream end disposal points, because there's so much more volume, as you referred to, due to that additional activity at Christmas time, but also the collection methodology means there's significant additional volumes on certain days that puts a big pinch point on the facility and our contractors as well.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to thank Veolia for the work they put in throughout the year, the waste team for the work they put in. And if anyone's ever been down to the transfer station at Christmas and seen the mountain of waste there is there, it's horrendous. But, okay, so there's a hiccup on this, but perhaps we can take some positives from this, and perhaps something we could perhaps look at, David. Now, the transfer depot, if we was, the weeks leading up to Christmas, we don't collect the green waste, so we've got a little bit more room in there. What about if, I'm not saying we would do this every year, but if we was to look for an overflow site for the recycler, you could use all the facility for the residual waste, which would give us a bit of breathing space. I mean, I know over the years we've had meetings prior to Christmas and we've booked extra bulkers to try and cover the extra surge of waste coming in, but it's just the thought whether or not we could look at some overflow site, whether it's yours or Medway's, just to deal, because it would be easier to deal with the recycle to move that on 2 weeks after Christmas if there was a hold up. Something you could look at, I'd be happy.
Thanks, Councillor Filmer. It's an idea. What we'd like to do in some sort of slow time is to review the process, reflect on all of those options, see what's viable, see what's most efficient, and see what's feasible within the available resources. So we'll happily take those comments on board and we'll reflect on those. What we're after, has already been mentioned, is that confidence that there's not a repetition of this, which I think is important. So yeah, we'll certainly take those comments on board when we kind of devise a revised approach.
Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do want to express my thanks and gratitude for all the teams that actually make waste collection happen in such a timely and regular manner all through the year, and how everybody pulled together during the holiday period to kind of manage the crisis. So thank you for that. My questions are around sort of contract management and things like that. So my understanding of a service contract is things like capacity management, business continuity. They should be explicitly named and an integral part of the contract. They should also be reported on and reviewed regularly with the customer. So I want an assurance that there is a distinct business continuity plan, and that what happened this past year in terms of your contingency plan couldn't deal with the capacity. So that contingency plan then needs to change if we are to continue how we are continuing. Do you see what I'm getting at? I'm just saying, if you have a business continuity plan, then what we saw was that didn't work for lots of reasons. I'm not, assigning blame. So we need to kind of review that plan, and I'd like some assurance that that'll happen. And you said that. You've just said that actually the problem was waiting to happen. It would have inevitably happened because of the model we have here in Medway of how we manage the holiday waste collection. So you're the experts. Presumably you do this for other local authorities as well. So will you be sharing that expertise with Medway Council and sort of guiding those conversations, coming up with alternatives which you think will work better? Because it would be good to have that on the table. Just contract management issues. Thank you.
That's okay. So the contract is very well managed. And part of the issue with the waste industry, and it is an industry, it's one of the few things where the council's involved in this heavy industry. You've got that just in time and just in case philosophy. And like with everything, it's just in time. And when that's coupled with Christmas, it's very difficult. So the way we need to manage this is to take it and to maybe reflect on the tempo that we collect this rubbish. Because buying that capacity in just in case is going to be a financial liability. So we'll be guided very much by our colleagues in Veolia along with Norse, and we'll be looking at that to make sure we bake in a degree of resilience in doing that. Has that addressed the issue? Yeah, please.
Just reference your points around the expertise. Obviously, as Veolia, we're not the waste collection contractor within Medway. We were previously, but we obviously have a waste disposal contract with Medway, but we do operate a significant number of contracts, about 30 contracts up and down the country. So we would certainly like to be able to offer our expertise in terms of the different collection methodologies that we operate across different local authorities, how they work dependent on the infrastructure that's in place in those given authorities, and how that may be able to be useful in terms of future alterations to the collection methodology here in Medway.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, just so I understand this completely, what you're saying is contingency planning cannot ever be 100% perfect in terms of matching the entire capacity. It'll be restricted by things like the cost of that. Is that what you're saying?
There's an element of Christmas that when we go into Christmas, we go into a perfect storm. And so that contingency capacity that we have is required by almost everybody else in the country. And once there's almost a cascade effect. And so we need to devise that resilience. It's not something necessarily we can buy in. An aspect is third parties doing it, but as we said in the report, our methodology needs to meet that halfway.
Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. Hi, Ian. So, in section 3.9 of your report, you give a table, and it's actually modified on the supplementary agenda. And you say in 3.10 that the way that the way we delivered successfully in the 2 previous years was the fact that we had the same makeup. So we actually had 2 days where we have 15 days of waste. Now that seems to be, so it's not, so I'm not really talking about Viola, I'm talking about our instruction as a council to Medway North. I think it was an error. We should have just let it, rather than wait 15 days, we should have said, you know, the day after Christmas Day, after Boxing Day was actually, should be the Monday collection and Tuesday collection. Therefore, we could have controlled the amount of waste being kind of picked up. I'm quite sure Viola will have to explain why they had errors and problems themselves, but we didn't help by throwing a lot of material at them in one big go. Those 15 days was not acceptable. And also the fact that it's the fact that because we got into a delay position in my half of the part of the borough, it's Strood North, Strood Rural, Cuxton Hall, and Strood West. The collection that was supposed to be delayed by day on Saturday the 6th didn't happen. And I said to you in an email, what will happen is that people forget they have a bank holiday and they'll be putting out bags on the Friday, because it happened for the last 2 years. So I was correct. A lot of bags went out on the Friday. They sat there and people put out more bags on a Saturday, went around talking to people on Saturday. And there was one guy, he told his near colleagues that they shouldn't have put the bag out on Friday, it was Saturday, he was putting his bags out on Saturday morning. Because all the information we had got out was actually, the magazine was the one that was most relevant. We got out information on Facebook, but that's only for a day. It didn't make any sense. If we're going to have a problem, we need to be telling people over and over again, getting out the fresh information. So what happened so the collection didn't happen on the Saturday, and it went to the next Friday. And you know, North only just did it. So I sent you an email saying my road hadn't been done, and it was getting dark. And they were going around in the dark collecting Medway North. They've been out since the early things. So the problem kicked on. It wasn't rectified on the following week, a week after New Year's Day. It wasn't rectified until the Friday of that week. So that problem wouldn't have come about if we just had a rolling day. You know, when I lived in Chelmsford, they just had a 5-day week, and week 1, Monday, the collection on the Monday. As soon as you had a bank holiday, day 1 moved a day. It was never a problem, because the only issues that residents started talking to each other, say around about Christmas time, we said, when is day 1 now? When is day 2? It was never a problem, because you got around the problem of, because I've told you I don't like to see our staff working on bank holidays. I don't think it's really done. I know you say that some enjoy getting paid, but the guys I talk to say the opposite. So I think we made an error with the programme we had set out for North to work to, and we compounded that the problems that Viola had. So that's what I'm saying. Next, we should never do this thing again. We should have a rolling week, until we catch up. And with the other advantage is that we had a cold period and no wind. So fortunately, between the Friday the 5th until the following Friday, we had no wind, and we had low temperatures, and therefore foxes and cats weren't being encouraged to go out to go and pull the bags apart, and the bags had not been pulled apart, weren't blown around. So, the street litter, which I was concerned about, didn't come about, but still there. Okay, there you go.
So in response to that, I don't think I disagree with you. And part of that idea of reconsidering how we approach it or take on board those points. And if you'd like to put your thoughts in, part of what the recycling and waste team do is they have a reflection on what we could do better. And those suggestions we're happy to take on board. And that's why in the report we recognised that we were this aggravating factor that almost created this situation. It's not something we don't recognise.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to confess, I only skim-read this agenda a couple of days ago, and I didn't have the chance to read it in detail. But I'm a little bit confused here. I'm looking at Table 2, Table 3, and Paragraph 4.3, which sits between them. If we look at the Christmas waste tonnage totals for 2021-22, and then 23-24, 23-24 is quite substantially less. And that is clearly reflected in Table 3 with the number of collection vehicle tips taken to the station. In 2021-22, we've had 569 vehicles going in. In 23-24, that was down to 507, quite a substantial drop in vehicle movements. Now, they're the same vehicles, as we all know, so it begs the question, why did we cope in 21-22 and we didn't cope in 23-24? I haven't been able to get into my mind what is the substantive difference between those years that made this occurrence occur. We've got less flow of waste, and yet we cannot, this last period, we couldn't cope with it. So what changed between 21-22 and 23-24 that made this occur? Perhaps it's in the report and I just can't understand it.
Thanks, Councillor Colvin. I think the important thing when you look at those tables is to make the comparison to the normal tonnage and to see that extra heavy capacity.
Come back there. Christmas occurs every year. We had Christmas in 21-22, we had Christmas in 22-23, and Christmas this year. The amount of stuff that was collected is substantially less than it was 2 or 3 years ago, and we couldn't cope. Yes, I agree, it is greater than the normal weekly collection, but that happens every Christmas. And in fact, this last Christmas, it was less of an increase. So what went wrong?
Okay, so what went wrong was in our disposal chain, working with Veolia, we had problems with the hauliers and problems with the disposal facility, and that extra load in the transfer station simply overwhelmed it. That was a risk every year. It just landed this year. And that was an industry-wide problem in the southeast that we were affected by. It wasn't an issue that we could buy ourselves out of because there wasn't the available hauliers to remove it. There wasn't the site to take it to. Hence why we made that decision, and the decision was made was to maintain Medway, Council and Veolia's legal licence. So if you think of this as being a cascading effect, we put a heavy load into a transfer station, and as soon as we stop emptying that, it rapidly overfills. I don't know if there's anything that Veolia would like to add, or is...
I think you pretty much covered most of it there. There was a specific issue with one of our disposal facilities, one of our energy from waste facilities that had an unfortunate event that led to its closure the week, kind of Christmas week. And that meant we had excessive amounts of waste within the waste transfer station than we would have ideally have liked entering into the first week of January when the double collection days happened. And as a result of that, that created a backlog. So as I kind of said, every year it's operating on a knife edge because of the additional volume and that unavailability of that facility, and then the resultant backlog in the ability for bulk haulage contractors to get back to the facility and get loaded created this specific issue in this year.
Happy with that, Councillor Colvin? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, but it does beg the question that what would have the situation be had we had the similar waste volumes to 3 years ago. So it's all right for Viola to blame an outside contractor, but I think the blame lies with lack of capacity to move the stuff, and that's the lesson I think we've got to take away from this. And I think it's not so much for this council and Norse, who just did their job as normal. They collected the stuff, and it appears that it could not be taken away. So I think we need a strong conversation with you at Veolia to make sure that in future years you have that sufficient capacity in the system to deal with it.
Yeah, I think it's clear that while there was a sort of perfect storm in terms of the problems, we were also, the weather gods were kind to us, and some of the other issues, such as the actual waste tonnage, were helpful in making that, as short-lived an issue as possible. Councillor Field.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to build on that point in terms of capacity. What actions could be taken to increase capacity, and what actions are being taken?
So we have obviously a facility that was built and designed back in 2010 when the disposal contract started. It has capacity to handle waste volume day to day with some contingent capacity within there. I will go back to the root cause is the collection methodology and the fact that there is double the volume that's collected on certain days, and the transfer station just isn't designed to cope with that volume. So in previous years, we put on additional haulage, we run additional hours, but there is only so much you can do whereby it's a risk every year in terms of business continuity to be able to guarantee that we can perform without building a bigger waste transfer station or having additional waste transfer stations. The unfortunate thing in Medway is there aren't very many permitted, licensed other alternative facilities, either operated by Veolia or third parties, that can handle and process the kind of volumes that are generated within Medway. So I think we do need to give consideration to that in terms of our business continuity planning moving forward, and goes back to that fundamental point on the collection methodology, placing that increased pressure on the facility.
Any other member? Councillor Hamilton.
So I want to thank everybody, and it's great that we have now dealt with the issue over Christmas. So my question is, we've known for 10 years that there is a potential issue, that we could hit a complete critical incident that could then just cascade and create more problems. So when we were looking at the design and building resilience into the waste management supply chain, why were we not looking at this at that point? That's my first question. Second point is that, it's really unfortunate that in this case, the critical incident happened at the choke point in the supply chain, and then the mitigation issues didn't work on this occasion. So whilst there had been some planning and thought put into continuing the business, it was just an unfortunate series of events that happened afterwards. So you can only do so much contingency planning, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. But given the importance of that potential, or that actual choke point in the supply chain, what other things could have been done that were not considered in the contingency planning up to that point? And then the next thing is really, it's a broader question around, it's really great to see that the volume's decreasing year on year over the last couple of years, over the Christmas period. But what else can we do to reduce the volume over the Christmas periods through other means, i.e. thinking about consumer behaviour, about consumption patterns, broader issues that can actually reduce that huge increase in volume that we experience over the holiday period itself. So that's probably a broader question, stimulated by the fact that we had this complete crisis over Christmas. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. You've raised an excellent point and it kind of echoes back to some of the things that Councillor Curry mentioned. We've got the government policies on simpler recycling. We've got the government initiatives on downsizing packaging to increase that. The philosophy that's going on about less food waste, making sure that you channel your waste through the right chain, things that Councillor Curry has mentioned. It is a challenge, and we've got to look at this, and I know you're reflecting backwards. I'm kind of looking now, and the bit that causes me concern is the 28,500 houses that Councillor Curry mentioned are going to be built, and that's why we need to be looking for solutions now, and that's very hard. The commercial operation that Veolia operated was right, and it was built on a site. And what we need to do is we need to, as part of this waste strategy, say actually where do we want to be? What are the solutions for this? And we can only really do that in partnership. You know, and I know I've said that word. Veolia really are a partner to us, and a lot of what we do and a lot of the technical knowledge that they have, we're reliant on. So you've highlighted lots of things. You can't plan yourself out of every eventuality. But what we're saying is there are things that are still left to play, and that's the tempo of that waste collection, because that removes some of the pressure from that site, and it means that we have longer to come up with a strategy about how we're going to manage waste in Medway moving forwards. I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add on the transfer station.
Only that we're very keen to continue to work in partnership with Medway Council. Clearly there's a need to look at business continuity and what can be done, going back to some of the points that were made earlier in terms of contingent sites, and whether there's anything that can be done to provide some additional contingency in future years in terms of transfer capacity within Medway.
Any other member? Okay. I'm always loath to let politics rear its head in these meetings. I said in the first meeting that I chaired that I was really delighted that, you know, we were coming together as a team and hopefully as far as is possible leaving our politics behind us at the door. But, you know, it's still an appropriate moment, since we have the Leader of the Opposition substituting tonight, to note that some of these meetings have ended, and then, you know, open up your mobile phone and find that the Medway Conservatives Twitter feed is full of strange and wild accusations about, you know, things that we've discussed, in my view, in a very reasoned and reasonable way in this meeting, and certainly I deprecate that. But on this particular issue, I note that, and I'm not going to hold people here responsible for the actions of the Right Honourable Kelly Tolhurst MP, but I note that on the 3rd of January, after this issue first arose, that she tweeted that this was very disappointing from Medway Labour. It's taken them just 6 months to ruin our bin collections, and we need an explanation as to what has happened and how they will avoid this happening again. And, you know, you can treat that as a rogue element, but then 24 hours later, not a rogue councillor, not one of your more extreme members of your group, but actually on the official Medway Tories account, we have a very similar sentiment talking about Labour bin crisis with a pretend headline and graphic to go along with it. Now, I think we've had a really good discussion tonight, and I think actually we've explored that there was a lot more complicated issues, and we're in a general election year and there will be more politics played, and I would just caution members of this committee from both sides that we are going to get better answers if we continue the constructive way that we have conducted ourselves in these meetings so far. And if there's any opportunity to have a word with whoever is posting some of these rather outlandish claims, then I think that word should be had. And I think the final word should go to Kelly, who says we need an explanation as to what has happened and how we will avoid this happening again. Well, I hope you're watching tonight, Kelly. I'm really glad to have you as one of our viewers, and I hope that you will see that this committee is perfectly up to that task and has asked those questions, and I'm grateful to members
doing so, and I'm grateful to officers for taking on board those recommendations and from our partners at Veolia, and I'm confident that if another crisis happens somewhere down the line, it won't be for want of planning or for taking account of what has happened this time. So on that note, Vice Chair, do you have a proposal?
Thank you, Chair. The committee is asked to note the content of the report.
Is that seconded? Agreed? Thank you. I'm happy for our partners from Veolia to make an early exit, and Natasha as well, if you want to do so, before we move on to item 8, which is the Housing Revenue Account Capital and Revenue Budgets 2024-25 on pages 43 to 86 of your agenda pack. And this item will be introduced by Mark Brethwick. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So the report sets out the budget for the Housing Revenue Account for the year 24-25. The draft budget has been built on the basis of using the full rent cap figure from the government's methodology of September CPI plus 1%. This is an increase of 7.7% to council rents for this year. This puts the average social rent at 176 pence per week. We take a local position on affordable rent to cap them at the local housing allowance. So affordable rents will be a 7.7% increase or set at the local housing allowance rate, which is still to be determined, whichever is the lower. Taking the figure of 7.7%, the average affordable rent will be set at £167.47 per week. This budget has been modelled over a 52-week period, and 24-25 has 53 rent weeks in it. So a rent-free week will be introduced for the final week of this year. Garage rents will also increase by CPI plus 1%. Service charges have reduced on average by 26 pence per week. The report goes on to detail the financial performance of the housing revenue account. I think it's fair to point out that rent arrears is still they're still in a position that is significantly higher than we're used to seeing in Medway, but our numbers do benchmark very well with other providers across the sector. The report sets out the responsive and planned maintenance requirements for the stock and projects requirements for a further 2 years. There is an issue in the report in terms of the tables that set out at 9.5.3 excludes in a totaling excludes the £200,000 a year for adaptations. That will need to be corrected following this committee. That also affects the source of capital funding in table 9.5.4, which will also need to be increased to the tune of £200,000. The report goes on to set out the development aspirations for the housing revenue account, provides an update on the working balances, and provides an update on the housing revenue account business plan, which we refresh regularly. And really what that's saying, it's quite a long and detailed report. Essentially what that's saying is the HRA is perfectly sustainable at its baseline position. It can cope with doing some more development in the housing revenue account. But once you combine those two things with requirements to bring the stock up to zero carbon efficiency standards, that it does place quite a challenge on the housing revenue account. So there will be continued focus on us trying to lever in any grant funding that we can to make that position more sustainable. I'm happy to take questions from there, Chair.
Any member? Councillor Doe.
Yeah, I'd like to say how much I agree with this, because really I think the housing revenue account is something that I don't think really is a political issue, not to the council. I think that I always thought that buying, when we come for our development side, when we come to buy properties for temporary accommodation, I think that works as well for me, because at least you're acquiring an asset rather than simply paying for something that you don't retain and has no value to you, and add to which, of course, in the end, it's likely to be cheaper. But I think that we tried it out, as you know, last year, and it works well. And I think bringing it on a larger scale, as this will do, was certainly something I warmly support. So I think this is a very thorough report. I have read it in detail, and I would like to support it and say that I think that it's business as usual and it's been done very well. Congratulate Mark Brethwick.
Any other member? Councillor Hamilton.
It's just a question concerning paragraph 7.3.3. I've written over it. So I noticed that we're anticipating increased tenant rent arrears, partly due to the way that universal credit is being administered and the increasing approach by the current government to reduce benefits for people. Obviously, we're anticipating an increase in tenants' rent arrears. What approach are we likely to take to tackle that issue? That's my question.
Thank you, Councillor. What the approach that we take is really one of support, essentially. So we have dedicated posts that sit within the housing revenue account that are just there to focus on maximising people's income. So the more resilience that we can put into people's financial situation by making sure that they're picking up any potential unclaimed entitlements to any other benefits, such as PIP and other things that are out there. We have a very good working relationship with our welfare and benefits team, and we work closely with them to maximise the benefit of things like discretionary housing payments or household support funds to housing revenue account tenants. And we'll continue to do that. I think there's probably a bit more work for us to do around linking up with kind of the skills agenda and works with Job Centre Plus to really build on that. But we're also very keen to pick up any kind of safeguarding requirements, any other additional support, mental health support. We will signpost people off to the right services to try and do that. I completely recognise that a rent increase is a really challenging thing for residents, but the average rent on a council social housing property is £100 a week, which is still pretty low. But we will really lean on those supporting residents to maximise their income and make sure they've got everything they need.
Any other member? Councillor Nestorov.
Thank you, Chairperson. I actually have a few questions, so I wrote them down, but I'll go one by one. My first question is actually almost the same as Councillor Hamilton's question. So a 7.7 social increase, it's a lot given the current economic climate and tenancy affordability. What are the specific strategies in place to mitigate the impact of rent and service charges for tenants, particularly to those of the low income and the one receiving universal credit?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure there's much more I can add from my previous answer, if I'm completely honest. So you've used the same question.
Second one is kind of connected to the first one as well. Can you provide more details how the business plan can adapt to high inflation, which we currently have, and potential government interventions?
Yeah, I think we try to model various scenarios. I think it's really difficult. If you had asked me 2 years ago to predict, 11% inflation, that is not a scenario that I would have modelled at that particular time. But we are always very prudent with our assumptions in terms of the housing revenue account business plan. We don't assume significant rent increases, and that kind of nets off against the inflation. Generally, the two work together. So if you've got relatively high inflation, you're going to see larger rent increases, and that will typically kind of level out in respect of the business plan. Obviously, we have in this version of the business plan modelled the requirements, so a baseline position, but also the position with more development and the position with our kind of net zero carbon requirements. So they're kind of the typical scenarios that we're working on. But we continue to review it twice a year. So anything that is emerging, so if we hear of kind of government policy or kind of any local intelligence about what might be happening with our stock or any aspirations there might be for estate improvement, then those are things that we will build into the business plan to really see what that looks like. But it's built on a number of variables.
So it's an educated guess, which is good enough for me. And final question, it's actually a bit of an to make something clear for me. I was looking at the budget assumption on page 67, and it seems to me that 1/3 of our expenditure is allocated for management. Is there a way to reduce that spending page 67. Additionally, could you clarify for me what RRT means?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was just getting to the right page in the document. Yeah, so we're continuing looking at efficiencies for the housing revenue account. So reviewing kind of our staffing structures. I mean, pretty much any management costs really are around direct staff and some contracts around IT systems and various other bits and pieces. So where we can go through a competitive tendering process for anything that we're doing in the housing revenue account. We will go through the same procurement process that the council will for absolutely anything else. So our repairs contract that's coming up has been through kind of the various gateway stages and will go on to the cabinet. So that is the process we use to control all of our costs. In the same way that the housing revenue account operates as a business within the council, essentially. So in terms of some of those centralised services, the housing revenue account will pay for its own HR support, for its own payroll support, for all of our postage and things. So there's lots of things laid into that management that we wouldn't usually see separated out across the council, essentially. So that's where it is. But I take the point entirely. We need to be as efficient as we can with it. I don't actually know what RRT stands for. That's a really good question. So I will find that out and I will drop you an email to let you know.
And just a final one, I promise. Does that mean that most of our management is done in-house? Or do we delegate this work to outside bodies?
Yeah, so really good question. So part and part. So a lot of management. So if you look at your kind of rent collection officers, your tenancy sustainment officers, performance and intelligence, a lot of that is done in-house. We do contract out for repairs. That contract is currently with Mears, and we have individual contracts for some other pieces of work that Mears wouldn't take on. So we have like a roofing contract that's ongoing at the moment, and things like grounds maintenance and cleaning sit with Norse. So there's a contracted out arrangement there, although parts of it are closely linked with the broader kind of corporate contract.
Thank you. Back to Councillor Hamilton for a quick supplementary.
Yeah, so it's actually point 14.3, 14.4 relating to benchmarking and the tenant satisfaction measures. So I noticed that we've done the baseline survey. There were a couple of responses and results that I was a little concerned about. We had satisfaction that your landlord listens and acts was 46%. Satisfaction with complaint handling, 28. Satisfaction with your neighbourhood, 45. And satisfaction with landlords handling of ASB, 39.9%. So obviously that's the baseline survey, and you're in the midst of doing the analysis of the next one. Do you anticipate seeing an improvement in those satisfaction rates, and what measures have you put in place to ensure that there is continuous improvement in those areas? Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, a few points in there that I'm inclined to agree with. I think what I would say is that so this is new. So the survey is a brand new initiative. We don't yet know where we stand on a national level, so that kind of benchmarking will become available in the fullness of time. We have made a very conscious choice to do a survey that is completely separate from the council, essentially. So it's done by a company, essentially, that will contact people. We don't know who's answering what questions. That does make it quite challenging to unpick and know where our focus is likely to be. We have put together a number of action plans around some of these initiatives. There are some really simple things in there, and there are some communications things in there as well. So, for example, if we take your landlord listens and acts, we have been better in the last year, following or last 6 months following results from the survey at telling people what we are changing on the back of these things. We've introduced a program with door knocks where we will send all officers from the team out to estates to kind of knock on residents' doors, ask them questions about how they're feeling, what they think about the services that they're being offered and the way that we're running them, and taking that information back and acting on that, as well as picking up any kind of complaints there might be about damp and mould or repair issues that we want people to talk to us about. Satisfaction with complaints handling and antisocial behaviour are really challenging, because I think what we're probably seeing there in some of the numbers is actually satisfaction with the outcome from that complaint, as opposed to the way that we've handled it and the questions that are asked in the methodology. I think they need a bit of refining at a regulator level, because they're not. They're hard for me to understand. They're very jargony, I would say, and I think they could be set out much more clearly to help people understand what question it is we're actually asking. At the same time, if we take complaint handling, we don't actively tell people, other than having, we have a published complaints policy and we tell people how to make complaints. We don't tell them how we've handled their complaint. We respond to their complaint. So actually something we probably just need to be a bit better at is saying, we will handle your complaint in this way when we acknowledge it, and then when we reply, we need to say we've handled your complaint by doing X, Y, and Z. So just trying to separate the outcome from the process of complaint handling. I want to see these numbers higher. Members will want to see these numbers going in the right direction. They will be reported regularly, so we will always bring them now as part of the budget paper. We've also weaved them into the review of the council plan, so members will start seeing them quarterly. They're not going to change a great deal quarterly, but we can talk about the programmes that are in place and what we're doing to improve them. And I think the benchmarking will be really interesting once we get that. I think that's probably about all I can say on that. Thank you.
Any other member? Councillor Field.
Just one simple question. Do you think that there is an urgent need for development of significant numbers of high-quality social housing in the Medway towns?
Well, I think if you look at the numbers of households that we have in temporary accommodation, the numbers of people that are on the housing register, yes, I think we do need it. We have a need for new social housing or affordable housing products to be delivered. I think various needs surveys will also point to that fact. Numbers and how many is always going to be a subject of much debate, but I think there's quite a clear rationale for saying we need more than we have currently.
Back to you, Vice Chair, for a proposal.
Excellent. You'll be glad to know I have a long and I have a short proposal, and I shall pick the short proposal as everyone was in agreement. The committee is asked to recommend to the Cabinet the recommendations set out in paragraph 1.1a through to 1.1i, as set out on pages 43 to 44 of the agenda papers.
Is that supported? Agreed? Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 9, which is a call-in on Union Place Car Park, Chatham and Temple Car Park and Yard, Strood, on pages 87 to 98 of your report. At request of Councillor Filmer, Councillor Brake is going to present the call-in. If you wouldn't mind stepping forward.
Chair, are we taking both car parks together on one item? Yes? Yeah?
I think that is that not the nature of the call-in? The call-in is on the decision for both.
Good evening, Chairman, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to the overview and scrutiny this evening on the subject of the call-in. If you could just bear with me a moment, please, while I pull up the necessary.
Yeah, absolutely, take your time. I've put you on the spot.
Chair, is the member speaking for 5 minutes only? as not a member of the committee?
Well, Councillor Brake, how long were you intending to present for? I agreed to this request instead of a presentation by a member of the committee, so I'm relaxed about breaching that guideline, provided that we don't go too far. If that's all right.
Okay, thank you. The reason this call-in has been presented to overview and scrutiny is really on the grounds that we consider that perhaps it would be better at this stage that it go back to Cabinet to revisit the whole situation with regard to both of the car parks. But Councillor Filmer raised the issue, are we looking at both car parks? Well, yes, we are, because both car parks were included on the same Cabinet agenda. But I'd like to home in on some of the issues relative initially to the Chatham car park at Union Place and point out that this particular car park was on and off with regard, do we sell it, do we keep it, do we sell it, do we keep it? And it got to the stage where nobody really knew exactly what was going on, and in particular the local residents of that end of Chatham High Street, to the point that contact was made to me by the gentleman who runs the Spotlight Little Theatre, somebody that I know, and I know quite well because of association with the local scouts, and hence my involvement with what was going on. It appears that the new owners of the Gala Bingo Hall area do in fact are looking to develop the whole area, redevelop the whole area, I should say. And it appears that included in conversations along the way has been the opportunity for them to purchase that car park. I understand that that was not understood and basic or genuine knowledge by all the local residents and shopkeepers, and in particular, in this case, the Spotlight Theatre. They actually, the developer actually called a public meeting, and I suppose really that was the first opportunity there was of any form of consultation, where it became very clear that it was not exactly well attended, but it certainly became very clear that this was not a popular decision. And the developer, in the case of the Spotlight Theatre, actually offered 2 car parking spaces to be available once the whole programme had been completed. 1 car park space would be available to the manager, and the other car park space would be a disabled place. And that really was the long and short of the car park as we know it today. It would have all gone, and they were the only 2 places being offered to Spotlight. But equally, all of the businesses to be found at the Luton end of the High Street do in fact command a great deal of respect and a great deal of patronage from a lot of people from right across Medway. There are 3 or 4 restaurants there that are well used. But in addition to that, there is the boxing club, there is also an undertaker's, there is a dentist, and many other businesses that are placed there. And none of them have ever been consulted as to what would happen when the car park would go. But of course, the developers have in fact closed the car park, and now the chickens are coming home to roost, in as much as all of these businesses are now realising, because there is no car parking facility that they had, that there is serious trouble, and they're finding a downturn in all of their businesses simply because car parking is not to be found anywhere near that area. So because of this, Mr. Chairman, I've come here this evening on behalf of the other councillors that signed up for the call-in to respectfully request that
this be sent back to Cabinet with a request that they consider the decision over the sale of, in this case, both car parks, because that was both car parks that were considered for the call-in and the initial decision from within the Cabinet. Also, I would also say on the Strood side that I think the wording in the Director's report was one of, well, in both cases that car parking spaces is to be found elsewhere. So other cars can park anywhere else in Strood or in Chatham. But when we really look at the situation, even in Strood, that car park is essential, because the only other car park is the commercial road car park, which is to be found close by to McDonald's, just to give an indication to everyone exactly where it is. Of a weekend in particular, that car park is full to overflowing, and the Temple Place, Temple Street car park, I think it's called, that is really an overspill car park. And if that goes, the businesses within Chatham are in fact the ones that are going to suffer. That really is the basis of the call-in, Chairman. And as I say, I would respectfully request that the overview and scrutiny pass this back to the Cabinet for reconsideration over the decision, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brake. Now, before we move on to members, David England, who is our Head of Valuation and Asset Management, is going to present the officer report in response.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments, Councillor. And I was the person who prepared the... is it coming back a bit? Right, okay. Prepared the report. These sites have been on agenda for disposal at various times. Temple Car Park has been on the disposal since 2011. That went through Cabinet and Council for sale to Tesco's, which was approved, but that sale fell through. Temple and Union Street Car Park obviously was going to the same route, and that was pulled back in 2011. The main issue with the Union Street car park is that we only have permissive rights to access that car park. So now that Buzz Bingo's owners have decided to close that car park is unable to be used, and the only alternative is would have been an access point from the A2 itself. That is not feasible from a cost point of view, because that car park is considerably lower, 5 or 6 feet lower than the actual road itself. So putting in ramps would be extremely expensive. You would lose a lot of car parking. And from a highway safety point of view, having ingress and egress from a car park so close to a traffic junction unfortunately wasn't thought of at the time. Plus, of course, it would destroy those trees that are along that boundary. Turning to your point concerning distances, we obviously do have the car parks at Road Street Car Park and James Street Car Park. They're both quite substantial, within 0.2 of a mile. So I would say only 5 minutes walk going down the high street. So it's not a bad walk, and crossing over with pedestrian crossing there to those restaurants that you viewed. Road Street Car Park and James Street Car Park. I'm talking about the local authority run car parks. So that's a practical issue, that we can't do anything with that. I have spoken with Spotlight to their chief executive, and they are interested in buying it themselves. So I can't say who will purchase our site. I know from my own visits there's quite a lot of drug issues around there, and that was actually confirmed by spotlights. So because there isn't much activity going around there, we've got a drug dealing problem there. So that's been confirmed by him. Turning to Temple Car Park, that again, as I said earlier, had been a very long-term redevelopment option. And as I said earlier, 2011, Tesco's were wanting to buy that from the council and redevelop it. Obviously, that always provides car parking to their customers. And as we all know, customers will use free car parking if they're allowed to, and that allows them to actually go into the high street. Plus, of course, there is the retail park there, and the commercial road car park is a better car park, and that's obviously got EV charging and has a very nice link into the high street, and it is the best car park there. So from the point of view of a capital receipt, which of course obviously the council is really in need of these days, and to facilitate redevelopment, because the Temple car park is not particularly attractive. It's at the back end of the Tesco's, and obviously this would, we are looking at a good quality redevelopment options that may well come forward. At the moment, we have not marketed the site because obviously this is only for, with the cabinet approval was only for permission to appropriate the site and to actually dispose of that. So that's as far as I can say. I think, in all fairness, I think they're the main issues that have come about, and in terms of the presentation of the cabinet report that was approved last month. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, some of the members this side are more than aware of these car parks because, as you mentioned, they've come up from time to time. I'll deal with the one in Chatham first. When this came forward, there was a lot of opposition against it, but when you weighed up the amount of money we were talking about getting off the developers, which seemed very small, you say about putting the linking up to the A2, well, it depends how you over-engineered it. I mean, we did get a price off Volkers, which was quite reasonable. We did lose a few spaces because of the ramp, but if you take that car park away from Chatham, and it's strange, and I don't want to get political, but the leader of the council now was very keen on keeping that car park open. So for some reason, he's changed his mind on that. Now, the one in Strood, Temple Car Park, Corporation Car Park, you're right, it's a nice car park, but it's too small. There's plans now for the Civic Centre. We're going to build a lot of houses there. We're also, the main one I'm concerned about is we're going to build a lot of houses around at Morgan Timber. Now, anyone who lives around there, if they want to drive into Strood, which they will, the logical place is to park in that Temple car park because it saves you driving round and parking in Corporation Street car park. Now, we've heard tonight about the car parking in Rochester, and the reason we decided in the last administration not to sell that one, again, I think if you check, you mentioned the sale when Tesco's were looking at it. My understanding is someone has a right of way over that. So monetary, I don't think it's worth that much money. We would, when you say we'll get a receipt for these two sites, I don't think you're talking about substantial money, but you're getting £23,000 a year return on the Temple car park. So I think when you weigh the two up and thinking long term about how successful Strood will be when the Civic Centre's done and the build out around Canal Road and all around there, we're going to be really sorry if we let that car park go. So, like Councillor Bragg, I think it ought to go back to the Cabinet for them to have another think about this.
Councillor Hubbard.
I'm amazed you don't know. I'm going to talk about Temple Street Car Park. So earlier on tonight, Councillor Etheridge talked about when Tesco's had been proposed and Tesco's going to buy the site. And part of that planning application was for Tesco's to be built on stilts underneath. There was a car park, and part of the arrangements was that the car park would also just not be free for 2 hours for people using Tesco's, but there'll be car parking spaces given for much longer periods of time so they could be used as park of serving people using the high street. Now, your administration produced something called the Strood Master Plan. I'm sure you've read it. That was published in 2019. I think part of the problem that Gary and I have is that the Strood Town Centre Forum hasn't met. I mean, it hadn't met all the time that Gary was on the council until relatively recently. That was actually a forum where there was discussions about development in the high street. So when, after May, I, myself and 2 other colleagues met with a developer. Oh, by the way, I know about the developer because he made contact with people living, the traders in the high street. The bit of the high street that runs opposite St Nicholas Church from Gun Lane to up by the church. Now, the developer there has looked at the Strood Master Plan, which shows potential development. Tesco's still want to move their store, yeah, and that's well known. And but they don't going to go for the big store they're going to have. They're going to have a much smaller store. The idea is that there is potential land swaps and a developer coming in to build a store, move the store, and by the way, a store with a car park that is available as the original idea was 10 years ago, for not just the people using the new located Tesco school that will be facing onto the high street probably, but also the fact that there'll be an arrangement where people can actually use the car park for longer than just 2 hours. So all I can say is just go and look at the Strood Town Centre Master Plan. You guys must have been talking to the people that this guy didn't come out of the woodwork immediately after the May election. You must have been looking to talk with this developer who was interested in wanting to have an opportunity to purchase the car park. So him, because you know that Tesco's just at their own site, they've been assembling land for years, and they have land holdings around their site. The idea is to move things around, move their store, and they're going to develop, come along with social housing, lots of housing, and a slightly relocated car park that's for the use of people using their store and for use of the high street. It hasn't changed. Just the size of the store has changed and the slight location. So please do your homework. If you produce something called the Strood Town Centre Master Plan, go and read it. You must be aware there's developers are coming on board wanting to do things. So in other words, and the Medway Messenger actually wrote up what Councillor Khan said in her meeting. She said, talking about Temple Street Car Park, there's a view around this site, around this particular site, where there's a strategy can be placed which can be the future of Strood comes forward, that the site can have interconnections. The car park would be retain potential and produce an income. In other words, we're talking about moving things around, still a car park there. Maybe the ownership of Tesco's, but still available for people to use. And have an arrangement, as there was going to be an original arrangement 10 years ago when planning permission was given for Tesco's for their store on stilts. I don't understand how you guys don't know. 10 years ago, but there's still the Strood Master Plan you produced in 2019. In that Strood Master Plan, it talks about a way going forward. The developer, which is currently coming on board, came on board about a year or so ago, so you guys must have been speaking to him, or maybe your former leader was speaking to him, because they didn't suddenly appear out of the woodwork after May. The conversation was quite clearly already advanced when they talked to the new boys on the block. So I don't understand. And The nonsense about the car park in Chatham, we all know. I mean, Councillor Brake, like myself, gave the potential developer down there, Bosbing, a pretty hard time, and the appalling way they behaved with spotlights. My son went to spotlights a year. I know the current leader of the spotlights very, very well. And it's appalling what the developer's doing. But you say a few parking spaces would go. No, they won't. About a third of the car park will just have to disappear. It's not viable. It's a complete nonsense. So you guys have got to get your act together. And if you're going to be real opposition, come up with something that really is in opposition, rather than just a nonsense you've produced tonight.
Sonny?
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Fillmore, I just wanted to respond to your comments on the costs of the Chatham, basically making it a car park without access through the Gala Bingo site. Just to be clear, I mean, the original costs were in the hundreds of thousands, and they were subject to a lot more work. So again, worked with colleagues in parking and highways to look at that. And also in terms of the planning, just to be clear, planners, their starting point was an access and egress that close to an existing junction on the A2. The default would be a no, and we'd have to prove otherwise because of the location. So it was just to clarify some of that advice, that early advice that we had. But yes, admitted we could look at this further, etc. But in the current financial climate, it's not something that officers can recommend because there's no budget to do that. Hence, the report going in around disposals. I think the key point there is if it can't be made a car park or we don't have the budget to make it a car park, it will just be an isolated piece of land, and the longer we leave it, the less likely we're going to be able to get a buyer for it. Hence, the advice from officers to appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Nesterov.
Thank you, Chair. I wrote my thing. It's easier for me to read it. Well, it's easier for me to read it. So, every elected member can agree with me that we need more housing units in Medway, but when the Cabinet actually finds a suitable location for such development, the item got called in. Last week, we had a proposal at Planning Committee for the construction of 57 flats close to Gillingham High Street. There was a letter from the Conservative MP Raymond Chisty advocating for the project on the basis that we'll make use of an existing brownfield site and would be a strong catalyst for ongoing regeneration. My question is, wouldn't this kind of development regenerate the area and increase the much needed foot traffic on our high streets? I have more. It will be more beneficial to the community than actually having two car parks that are barely used. Additionally to this, the Union Car Park has been dormant for several months, and its current state suggests that it would be unsuitable without significant modifications. This would include reducing the number of parking spaces, like Councillor Fillmore said, and construction of new entrance, which will come at a substantial cost to the council at a time when many councils, including Medway, are struggling with reduced government fundings. As for the Temple Street car park, its annual revenue amounts to only £21,543. With parking rates set at £120 for 1 hour and £170 for 2 hours, a simple calculation indicates that approximately 40 to 60 cars use the facility daily for short durations of 1 to 2 hours. This suggests that at any given hour, there are likely only 5 to 10 cars in the park. Considering that nearby car parks also remain largely unoccupied, they can easily accommodate the volume of these vehicles. The sale of these car parks represents a smart move towards using our resources efficiently and reducing waste. And lastly, I have a last question. One of the reasons stated that as to why this item was called in is because local businesses will suffer. how many businesses have actually contacted the council with concerns that these parking spaces will be lost? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've not had any contact with other local businesses at the moment. As I said, this was very much an interim cabinet approval so that we could appropriate and go to market. Obviously, we would expect during these further discussions that we will obviously report back any concerns from local businesses, of course.
You happy with that, Councillor Nestor?
Yes, thank you.
Did you indicate there, Councillor Hamilton?
So it's just some points of clarification, Sunny, if that's okay. Could you tell me how many businesses in Strood or Chatham have contacted the town centre management team or the economic development team about the council raising concerns about the disposal of the car parks? And also if you've had any queries regarding potential bids as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. My understanding is I think there was an email exchange about this fairly recently. I will double confirm, but I'm pretty sure that Anne Knight in my town centres team confirmed that there were no contact from businesses. And obviously, David has confirmed he hasn't had anything from the BAM perspective. In terms of interest, if I can hand over to you, David, just in terms of any thoughts, again, given the commercial sensitivity.
Thank you, Sonny. Yes, as I said, this is still very early days, and I've not tried to prejudice any party to take this forward. We obviously, my main role as a council employee is to seek the best value reasonably obtainable under the usual local authority governance. So we will keep a very open mind, and this will be reported back further.
Thank you. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. I have read through Town Centre Master Plan. I had spoken to Councillor Hubbard earlier on this month, and I had read it. And one of the first things that struck me about that was the phrase, there is an imbalance between public and private car parking, which present a major challenge. It then went on to say that Commercial Road Park and Temple Park is 175 spaces, but retail car parking spaces are 1,200, all of which have some restriction. You've got to shop there, you've got to stay there an hour and a half. So it seems to me that to put all our eggs in one basket again, at Tesco's, for example, who went right to the window, right to the signing on the dotted line and pulled out. Are we going to allow that to happen again? There's no guarantees, so we could be shutting down an asset. And I think parking spaces in all our towns, and especially Strood, are a precious infrastructure item. I have no problem with shutting Chatham. I think it's landlocked and it makes sense to me. Strood, to me, there was so much we could do with that overflow car park. We could use it as a market square. We could bring back the Strood market. We could have an antique market there. We could have flea markets. We could use it as a community space. And I think the other thing that Strood needs, and I talk about it quite often, I'm getting quite worried about it, is we need public toilets. And there is a council-owned asset that we could build on. And who knows, maybe having council-run toilets somewhere in Strood would encourage more people to come to Strood and park. I think the lack of that is very important. So I just think that we need to re-look at what we're doing with that. And we should be trying to get residents to shop in Strood and stay in Strood. Not just to do their grocery shopping, but to stay in Strood, have a coffee and visit other shops. And we can only do that if we've got enough car parking. Thank you.
Councillor Hubbard.
If I can be so helpful to Councillor Sands, Yes, there isn't. The market is coming back, but of course it's going to go into what I call a Furrow Place Plaza, which is that area between Aldi and the former Barclays Bank. That's where the idea for the market is. And for toilet facilities, well, there was one that was by Aldi has been removed, and yes, they are looking to replace it. And those two things are linked. But as I mentioned earlier on, in the potential redevelopment of that part of Strood, you're not losing any car parking. You're probably going to gain car parking in the long term, because you're going to have new build affordable housing. We need affordable housing, and we need to revitalise that part of the high street. I don't know if you go there, go and have a look at it, Ron. It's an awful bit of the part of the high street, and an awful little car sales next door, the bits of land that Tesco's have bought many years ago and just sitting there not doing anything. The whole area needs to be looked at and properly. That's what the Strood Master Plan talks about. And it's actually not losing car park, but looking probably to gain car parking in the end for use of people in the high street. So, yeah, the old Tesco's was 10 years ago, but it's never been forgotten. And maybe it was the former leader of the council and a certain councillor for Strood North that never didn't allow the forum, Strood Town Centre forum to meet, that probably knew about the very things I've been talking about.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair. One of the duties of this council is to make sure that we get the best return on our assets that we possibly can. And Councillor Brake has quite ably described the difficulty, certainly as far as Chatham's concerned, of the local businesses. But if we can, I think we should do what we can to alleviate that situation. But what concerns me is by putting these two sites on the market, you've actually devalued them. You've got the opportunity, by taking this back to Cabinet for a little bit of a think about, of actually getting more money. When I was the portfolio holder for resources, the offer for the Union Street car park was derisory. And what you've done now, by saying you're desperate to get rid of it, they're going to come back with an even lower sum. You're lucky if you get 100 quid for it. Because as you say, it's the landlord. You've got to have at least explored the opportunity to make it, of keeping it as a car park. Then you've got a bargaining chip. By just putting this onto the market, you've thrown that bargaining chip completely away. And that's to the detriment of the finances. And I think the same argument goes for Strood. The shortage of pressure on this council is not capital. We're well below our capital borrowing limit. As the paper that goes to full council tomorrow night for the Treasury Management Strategy ably demonstrates, what we're desperately short of in this council is revenue income coming in. And we must, I believe, maximise as far as we possibly can that revenue stream. And £21,000 might not sound a great sum, but you keep chipping away at these small bits and pieces by selling the assets off cheap. You won't get good value, because this has all the desperation of a fire sale about it. People will think to themselves in the development industry, oh, Medway Council's pretty desperate, we can put in any silly offer. So what I would suggest, the sensible thing to do is to take these sites off the market. See if there are alternative uses. Then if you've got the alternative uses that Councillor Hubbard suggests there may be in Strood, and we certainly know what could be done in Chatham by at least looking at how that car park could remain a car park, we will hold up the value of those sites by just offering them up for sale, you've just devalued them.
Going to come to Sonny in a second, but just on that point, and I think it is important if we can explore it, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Sonny, but are we able to give a bit of context in terms of the important revenue income, as has been pointed out, £21,543 from the Temple car park, although I'm guessing that the income from the other car park is £0 and 0 pence. So how does that compare? It's been mentioned tonight, Blue Boar car park in my ward, for example. Just, are you able to even give us some sort of ballpark figure as to how much the council might bring in revenue from a car park like Blue Boar in Rochester, just so that we can get some context as to just how valuable the Temple car park income is?
So I'm going to put Ruth on the spot as lead on parking, and whether that's a figure we can bring back. But before Ruth comes in, this paper was written not just by us in terms of property, but in collaboration with parking colleagues. So we were told that that was a low income as an indication. So to be fair to Ruth, she doesn't have a figure for Blue Boar Lane. The advice was given that it would be low, and then I'm happy to address Councillor Galvin's point afterwards if you want to go to Ruth first.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the figures. Sorry, I can get you the figures definitely of all the car parks, so you can see.
I don't think we even need to go into specifics. But in a ballpark, are we talking hundreds of thousands? Are we talking $250,000? Are we talking $500,000? What's the point of comparison?
Well, hundreds of thousands in some car parks. If you look at the multi-storey car parks, obviously they've got much more of a draw for people than a small car park. I think the thing that we need to take into account is the enforcement costs and also the upkeep of a car park as well. So it's not just the income that a car park attracts. It's how much it costs to run that car park, and there are lots of issues around car parks. They are part of the highway, so, we have to invest in our car parks as well. And, a car park's a problem if you're not actually enforcing it, because you've got to look at vandalism, unfortunately, with pay and display car parks, which is always an issue where people want to, they think they can get money out of the machines or what have you. So in the round, the advice that we gave to property was that actually, certainly the car park was closed. Obviously, that's a bit of a no-brainer, really. But in terms of the other car park, relatively small amount of money coming in.
Thank you. Yes. So I think when we talk about, use terminology like a fire sale, we're talking about, if we use that analogy and explore it further, we're talking about stock that's damaged beyond repair in comparison to the undamaged dead stock of some of our other car parks. I do think it's really...
With due respect, Chair, you're not comparing like with like.
Well, no, I'm comparing... Councillor Galvin. Councillor Galvin.
What you've got to look at is the return on the money invested. What is the return on the asset
I fail to see how comparing one car park with another is not a like-for-like comparison. What we are comparing is one that brings in no income, one that brings in a very small income, and other ones that bring in a very large income. That seems like a very fair comparison to draw. Sonny.
Sorry, so just in the spirit of trying to work with comments made and the one around the fire sale and etc. Just to be clear, this is, if you like, asking for permission to appropriate and market. It isn't saying that we're going to sell it for nothing or if it's not the value. So I would rely on the experts in my team to tell me whether or not, Councillor Galvin, it is looking like a fire sale, the offers come in. We don't have to accept the offers. So similar to when we had the original marketing exercise with Tesco's, that fell through, but quite frankly, if the offer isn't correct, and that's the advice that officers would give, we may not sell it. So there may be a compromise there along the lines that we need to wait to see what offer comes in, and also not only just the offer, but also the intended use. So we need to make sure that that does work, that it's a genuine regeneration opportunity, as opposed to selling it for land banking and so on and so forth. So that process, David and his team, we will work with the portfolio holder to try and get the best deal and the best option on those sites. It's not just simply give it away. So I just wanted to offer that reassurance.
Yeah, I think that certainly adds a note of caution. I would also draw another comparison to a disposal of an asset not that long ago in Rochester once again. We think of the sale of the Conservancy building, which was put out to auction. In other words, could easily have returned a perfectly derisory income. There was no caution built into that transaction, and luckily I think we had a couple of bidders which drove the price to an amount that we could live with. But yeah, I think that's certainly worth bearing out. Councillor Field.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank everyone for their forbearance tonight, and I appreciate it's been a long session. I just really wanted to reflect just on what the terms of the call-in are, and the terms of the call-in are to reverse the decision taken by Cabinet on 19th of December concerning disposal of car parking facilities as outlined in the title above. The car parks are shown to be required to be kept in place for the benefit of the community and local businesses who rely on such facilities. I think we need to think about that in light, and I thank Councillor Brake for putting his case forward and coming in and presenting to the committee. I just think that if we look at what the discussions are tonight and some of those themes that are not just in this item, you know, we've had discussions about congestion, we've had discussions about quality, we've had discussions about the need for social housing, we've had discussions about what we need for these towns. And I think hearing these arguments about revenue, I think hearing these arguments about, you know, what the planning policies that have been agreed and are long-standing on the situation, I can't see what the case is to show that these car parks should be kept in place for the benefit of the community and local businesses who rely on such facilities. Local businesses haven't raised concerns. We may have better benefits, better community facilities that could be given. Some of the car parking in Strood can be kept, but actually there are things that are probably more important and of more community benefits that could be produced if we dispose of these assets. And I really do think that this just feels like NIMBYism. It feels like we're protecting car parks for the sake of them being there. And actually, if we want to show a bit of ambition for these towns, a bit of regeneration, a bit of development of culture, a bit of improving the environment, there are better ways to use this space rather than just as a piece of concrete which can have runoff and more flooding. We can use these spaces better, and with respect, I appreciate the case being made, but I can't see how, on the terms of the calling, that actually the overall community benefit is taken with a couple of low-used, empty car parks. And I you know, obviously we're probably going to go to a vote in a moment, and there will be a difference of opinion, but I do hope the committee reflects on all the issues, not just in this debate, but in the wider debate as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Field. That was helpful to draw together some of those themes. Ordinarily, Councillor Brake, it wouldn't be appropriate to go back to you since you were here as a non-member of the committee to introduce one item, but I'll indulge it just this once.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to say one word after what has just been said, that that was the only time I've heard the word or the term compromise used this evening. And I do believe that, absolutely right, we need to look at the thing, at everything in the round, and really we need to safeguard the existing community, the existing businesses, as well as development. Therefore, why not look even closer and at least look at it, compromise? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. No other member? In which case I think we'll go to Vice Chair for a proposal.
Okay. The committee is asked to consider the called-in Cabinet decisions numbered 187 to 189, 2003, and decide either, firstly, to accept the Cabinet decisions and therefore take no further action. Secondly, to refer the decision back to Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out the reasons for the referral back, or thirdly, refer the decision to full council for consideration.
Councillor Field, do you have a proposal?
I propose to start with option 1.
Is that seconded? Is that agreed? Shall we have a show of hands? So I think that is carried.
Yeah, so there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So the proposal 1.1 is to accept the Cabinet decision and therefore take no further action. Thank you. We now move on to item 10, the work programme, which is on pages 99 to 116 of your agenda pack. Nicola is going to introduce the item.
The work programme is excuse me. The work programme is set out at Appendix A for the committee's information. The main change to report since the last committee is the addition of the meeting in February, which has changed the timing for some items. Thank you.
Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's an issue or a problem on the dates to be determined under the item Medway Local Plan. When I asked Councillor Maple in full council, are we going to have the proposed local plan to go before all the OS committees prior to it going to Cabinet and full council, he said quite categorically yes, which is against the information and objectives here. Following on from that, even if that's the state we intend to go for, there's no point whatsoever in having the committees to review it once it goes to Regulation 19, because all members here must be fully aware, once it goes to Regulation 19, it can't be changed.
Yeah. You're right. Councillor Hubbard.
There have been developments. Obviously, the Assistant Director is well aware, but there's going to be an announcement before long about what is Reg 18, what is Reg 19. So what you'll see in the papers there is a little bit out of date and will be further out of date very, very shortly.
I'm assuming then that we'll get an update tomorrow night?
Yeah. So it's not straightforward at the moment, but the advice from officers is actually contrary to what was advice given before, and it's the way to get through to the end, to get to Regulation 19, and it hasn't helped with a certain minister, oh yes, it's Gove, throwing his weight behind something that wasn't true, and that's changed the timetable and the way things have been perceived as well in the local plan process. So, watch this space. It's changing, Gary.
Thank you, Councillor Hubbard. I think that is helpful, and obviously we have the opportunity tomorrow night at full council in the overview and scrutiny section of the debate to raise any of these points further. I'd also just highlight that we have an additional meeting of this committee due to a substantial number of agenda items that have been added at various points and for various reasons. So once again, a second additional meeting before we've even completed a full year of this committee. And so I would also caution members of this committee that, you know, I would like to have a little bit of wriggle room within our agendas so that we can do things like we were able to do tonight, where we were able to address the Veolia waste issue in a timely fashion. We won't be able to do that if the agenda is endlessly being filled with you know, items which on the face of it might be expedient but aren't necessarily going to result in a particularly fruitful outcome. So I think that's just something for every member of the committee to bear in mind, that, you know, the work of this committee is very important, but we absolutely need to be able to focus on the questions that our residents are asking us to get answers to. And I'm glad that we were able to do that tonight, and I thank everyone for their attendance. And with that, I'll go to the Vice Chair for a proposal.
Yep. The committee's asked to note the report and agree the work programme is set out at Appendix A to the report. The committee is asked to note the action log as set out at Appendix B to the report.
Is that supported? Agreed? Lovely. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll see you again on the 28th of February. Thank you.